Chapter 204. The youth's eyes glowed brilliantly as he looked at Yun Yang and said faintly, "Young Master Yun's tactics are impressive indeed. However, young Master Yun should ask yourself, do you really dare to kill these people?" Yun Yang slammed the table upon hearing the youth's words and roared in anger, "How can you say that? What do you mean by my tactics? I've worked so hard to bring them out to play. Am I not to be blamed for it? The situation now is that they've lost money and started fighting, causing the current situation. Am I to be blamed for this?" The youth in black said coldly, "Young Master Yun knows better than anyone else what is going on. I only have one question. Young Master Yun, you've toyed with these people like this, but do you really dare to kill them?" Yun Yang said angrily, "Do you think I don't dare? If you dare to say another word, just one word, let me hear it. King Hell, if your father can't kill them on the battlefield, can't I kill them in prison? Try saying another word. Let's see if this young master dares to kill a few of them." Yun Yang slammed the table. "Isn't it just a war? A war? When has the Empire of Yutong not been at war all these years? Who the *ck are you trying to scare?" The youth in black sucked in a deep breath and clenched his teeth, not daring to say another word. Yun Yang, who had gained the upper hand, did not give up. He kicked the table in front of him away and said angrily, King Hell, your father was sent out to be a tour guide and I didn't get paid a single cent. How could I be bullied like this? It was your own people who lost money and caused trouble by fighting ungracefully. Your father ran all the way back to deliver the message, but someone actually doubts me. God, open your eyes and see, is there still justice in this world? Justice doesn't lie in the hearts of men, right and wrong can only be determined by others. Han Sanha closed his eyes as his head throbbed. His initially calm expression was nowhere to be seen. He was now certain of one thing. If the generals from various countries continued to stay here, it would not be surprising for a few of them to die if they were targeted by Yun Yang, the bastard. It was better to leave quickly. If the plan was to be abandoned, then so be it. He could not King afford to offend this person. Forget it. I'll think of something myself, Han Sanha said with a frown. After a brief discussion with the old marshals, they walked towards Qiu Jinhan's residence in unison. This time he was truly helpless and could only lower his head to that old bastard. They had no choice but to lower their heads. If two of those people who were caught died in there, it would be a big problem. The few of them sighed as they walked. Yun Yang continued to lecture the rest of the people. "Tell me, are you being reasonable? Are you being reasonable? I'm really King a dog. Why do the generals of your countries all have this kind of quality? What kind of quality was this? *ck me. Did you guys come here to ruin Yutong's culture? Poor me, who is as pure as a little white flower. I've only been with you for a few days, but I've already become so vulgar. Is there any way to do this job? Was this Yutong Dongxian Tianxi Deyuan or Zio? How lawless, all of you going against your conscience and distorting the truth, calling a deer a horse. God, I feel so miserable, so tired." The generals were exasperated as they looked at the man who seemed to be in a frenzy. This fellow was obviously in character. If your acting was so good, why don't you go be a movie king? Yet no one dared to speak up. After the previous bloody lessons, the generals were well aware of Yun Yang's crazed personality. The more they argued, the more spirited they became. Instead, they ignored him and slowly they gave up. "My head hurts. I'm going back to my room to rest for a while. My head hurts too. My stomach hurts. I suddenly remembered something. What is it? I'm going back to my room to think." The dozens of generals stood up as if there was no one else around, rolling their eyes and walking away. They did not even spare Yun Yang a glance. Behind them, Yun Yang's incessant grumbling could still be heard. "What kind of people are these? What kind of quality is this? You guys beat someone up after losing a gamble and even got caught. Such an embarrassing thing. You guys can really do it? I'm impressed. What kind of shame is this? What kind of quality is this?" Bang. The generals slammed the doors shut, blocking out the demonic voice outside. All of them held their heads in their hands and sighed deeply. Each of them felt as if 10,000 mythical beasts were galloping through their knee-deep fecal soup after the heavy rain. All of them could not help but curse, "This bastard." As for who they were cursing, it was a matter of opinion. On the same night, Yun Yang turned into a gust of wind and entered the prison quietly. This was the reason why he had captured these people. Yun Yang walked around the cell soundlessly. When he walked out, he heaved a deep sigh. He shook his head. It was not enough. Besides, there was another use for it. Why didn't that fellow give him a few more hits? The next morning, Han Sanha and the others brought the captured generals out of the yamen. However, each and every one of them was covered in dirt and grime, their heads hung low in dejection. The few old marshals had beaten and scolded them, teaching them a lesson. Then they discussed amongst themselves. If this went on, a few of them might really die. Forget it, let's leave. Hence on this day, the people from Zhou Deyuan and Tianxi bade Yunyang farewell without hesitation. Although they did not want to see this bastard, the blood of the hero was still on him. Yunyang nodded vigorously and patted his chest. Leave it to me. When the generals left, Yunyang collected the money for 50,000 pots of wine. Then each country was given 10,000 pots. Before the empire of Zhou's Marshal Zi left, Yunyang had a secret conversation with him. When he returned, he was holding something in his hand and stuffed it into his robe. No one knew what kind of deal had been made. When the soldiers of the various countries walked out of the city gates, they were met with thousands of disdainful gazes. All kinds of whispers filled his ears. See that? This is Deyuan. I heard that they're either lechers or gambling addicts. I heard. They're not here to celebrate Marshal Iron's wedding, but for the prostitutes. Not exactly, but not far from it. If they're not here for the ladies, then they're here to play with money. There's not even 1 in a million who's here to congratulate them sincerely. I also heard that they've been arrested after losing a bet and fighting. Why are the people over there like this? Lechers, gambling, and even taking their winnings. It's disgusting. How can people like this be generals? This is probably what they mean when they say they pick out a general from a pot. It's really destroying my worldview. Look at those people, they're all lethargic. I guess they're anxious because they didn't manage to play with the ladies. *CK. Damn it. That's right, damn it. Get out of here. Don't ever come again. Beat them to death if they dare come again. Yes, beat them to death. The generals of the various countries walked out of the city gates with their heads hung low, too ashamed to face anyone. There was no way they could explain themselves to these people. Therefore, the journey back home could really be described as covering one's head and scurrying away like a rat. The generals of the various countries left in unison. Other than Han Sanhe, all of Dongshuan's generals were sent back by Han Sanhe as well. They had no choice but to go back. The tour guide they had found here was too formidable. They could not hold him back. Only Han Sanhe was still there, lingering in Tiantang City. Now, only Han Sanhe, the youth dressed in black, and the 8 guards were left in Tiantang City from other countries. Yunyang mumbled to himself. He knew that Han Sanhe must have stayed behind for another reason, but he only knew the way but did not know the reason. No matter how skilled Yunyang was, he could still guess what Han Sanhe's real intention was without any clues or evidence. However, more than 95% of the foreign generals had left. Young Master Yun, the only official tour guide, had naturally lost his purpose of existence. He had retired and gone home to count his silver taels. During the time he was entertaining the foreign generals, Yunyang had leaped from a destitute man to one of the wealthiest people in Tiantang City. With more than 200 million taels of silver in his hands, he could not help but feel high-spirited and proud. With a certain someone's speed of getting rich, it was undeniable that no one would be able to do it in the future, but it was undeniable that it was unprecedented. Yunyang smiled faintly and tossed it to Emmy, taking out a piece of translucent, amethyst jade from his embrace. This was the reward that Yunyang had asked for from the empire of Zhou's Marshal Zi before he left. The matter was simple. Marshal Zi was of royal blood. His words held more weight than the marshals of other countries. Other than the first batch of 50,000 pots of the blood of the hero, he had also ordered the subsequent batches. This piece of jade was Yunyang's deposit and also a thank you gift. Looking at the departing generals, Yunyang's gaze was dark, but there was a glint of murderous intent flashing across his eyes. It's up to you all when you realize it, Yunyang mumbled to himself coldly. After all, I am from Yutong. Chapter 205. At the inn. An invitation was presented solemnly. Han Sanhe had been invited by old Marshal Chiu for a long talk. Yesterday, Han Sanhe had come with a group of old marshals to plead for the old marshal to release those people. Due to the circumstances, Han Sanhe had lowered his status, allowing old Marshal Chiu to hold his head high. Even now, he was still reminiscing about it, feeling a little unsatisfied. Therefore, the old marshal had invited Han Sanhe over to reminisce early in the morning, hoping to rekindle the past and renew their relationship. Reminisce? Ah, old Marshal Chiu's chuckle was full of glee, not bothering to hide it. It was a prelude. Han Sanhe's brows did not waver, his expression unchanging as he said faintly, "It's been so many years indeed, it's time to reminisce." Old Marshal Chiu chuckled and said, Those people you came to beg me to release yesterday, have they all left the city today? Han Sanha's face twitched subconsciously. You came to beg me yesterday. Han Sanha sat up straight again and said seriously, this old man has a vulgar word to say to you, shameless old man. I wonder if I should say it? Old Marshal Chiu coughed and said, since it's a vulgar word, it's better not to say it. Han Sanha snorted. After a while, old Marshal Chiu scratched his ears and cheeks for a good while before he could not help but ask, I say Han Sanha, you've helped those people so much. Didn't they thank you? Han Sanha's face was as red as a date, but he remained silent. No matter what, they should have given you some gifts, shouldn't they? The old marshal's thirst for knowledge was strong. Tell me, how did they thank you specifically? How many gifts did you receive? Old Hua, you're rich this time. Although they've lowered themselves to beg me once, it's still worth it. Han Sanha stood up and left with a flick of his sleeves. He didn't even say a word of farewell. In the face of such a shameless old thing, whose skin could be taken off and used as a shoe pad, and who specialized in exposing people's scars and taking pleasure in doing so, it was really a waste of breath to not speak a single word. Chiu Jianhan looked at Han Sanha's receding silhouette and called out loudly, Old Han, if there's anything you need help with in the future, just let me know. As long as it's within my means, this old man won't refuse or say anything else. Actually, there's nothing we can talk about between us. Don't say anything about begging or not, that's what's really disappointing. Han Sanha's footsteps hastened, as if he could not hear anything and could not hear anything as he hurried away. The old marshal's maniacal laughter could still be heard from behind, his laughter unbridled and overjoyed. Old fool! How dare you bully me like this? Exiting Marshal Chiu's residence, Han Sanha's face was already ashen, his heart filled with resentment. This old bastard said early in the morning that he had something important to discuss with him and tricked him to come here. In the end, he came here to let this old bastard have a good time. After this, he did have a good time, but he was injured, and his internal organs felt like they were burning. When we meet on the battlefield in the future, I must capture this old bastard and bring him to his death. You've gone too far. You've gone too far. Han Sanha was truly enraged now, words that should never have come out of his mouth spilling out into the world. The black-robed young man followed behind him without saying a word, following him closely. As they turned a corner, the group was suddenly stunned, coming to a halt immediately. Right in front of them, a man dressed in white was standing in the middle of the road. At this moment, everyone felt as if Mount Han's ice and snow were blowing in their faces. The man in white was wearing plain clothes that were as white as snow. His face was also as white as snow. Other than his hair and eyes, which were black, the rest of his body was snow white, as if he was in mourning. It would have been fine if it was just the color of the unlucky white, but the man's age was unpredictable. It was possible to say that he was 20 years old, it was also possible to say that he was 30, it was also possible to say that he was more than 40, it was also possible to say that he was an old monster that was hundreds of years old. Not only did the unlucky white look dizzy, there was also a chilling air that was as cold as a snowy mountain. Seeing that the man's aura had been cut off, the youth in black tensed up and took a step forward, shielding Han Sanha. The 4 guards by Han Sanha's side looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy as well. Clang, 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 without a word, they had already gripped their weapons in their hands, mystical chi vortexes forming rapidly in the air. Han Sanha's heart skipped a beat when he saw this. He had never been known for his mystical cultivation base. His mystical chi cultivation base was limited, so he could not tell the depth of the man in white's ability. However, his 4 guards were mystical chi cultivators, top-notch experts. Once the man appeared, all 4 of them moved in unison, ready to fight. It was a clear indication of the man's strength. Furthermore, the fact that the 4 of them had moved first meant that they were at a disadvantage. It also meant that the 4 guards had no confidence in dealing with the man in white. They had to channel their chi in advance to ensure their safety. Who was this man in white? How could he have such an imposing aura? Who are you? The youth in black was alarmed, his hand already caressing the jade bangle on his left wrist. The man in white said faintly, Marshal Han, is this how you treat your friends? Friends? Han Sanha frowned and asked, May I ask who you are? The man in white said, Marshal Han need not ask too much. I'm here on behalf of someone to protect you during your stay in Yutong. Han Sanha asked, May I ask who asked you to do this? The white-clothed man snorted and did not reply. His expression was filled with arrogance. May I know your name? Han Sanha asked. The man in white said coldly, I am Bai Yishue. Once the name Bai Yishue was uttered, the youth in black and Han Sanha's 4 guards paled at the same time. White clothes fluttered in the air like snow. The person in front of him was the rumored assassin of the martial world, Baishua. It was said that this person had once fought with Jun Moyen, the unrivaled swordsman in the world, and had lost to Jun Moyen by a single move. Although he had suffered a severe injury from Jun Moyen's sword that pierced through his chest, he had still managed to retreat in the air, causing Jun Moyen to be unable to chase after him. He had been so elegant and composed that he could be considered a legend in swordsmanship. Baishua. The Nine Heavens Blizzard, the divine sword White Robe. He ranked 6th on the swordsman chart. Han Sanha wanted to ask further. However, Baishua had already said coldly, Marshal Han need not ask who asked me to do this. I won't tell you even if you do. You only need to know that if I were here to assassinate you, you would have become a corpse by now. There will be no luck involved. Baishua was indifferent, as if he was announcing a fact. Han Sanha chuckled humorlessly but did not speak further. What Baishua said was true. If Baishua had attacked secretly and wanted to kill him, the success rate would be extremely high. Even if it was not 100%, it would be 99%. Just by looking at his 4 guards' expressions as if they were facing a formidable enemy, he knew that Baishua's words were true. Not necessarily. The youth in black said coldly, if you're really here to assassinate, it's still unknown who will die now. Baishua's crystal-like eyes looked at the youth in black's face as he said faintly, perhaps I will die as well in addition to your hidden strength, but the target I want to kill will definitely die before me. There's no guarantee. The youth in black sucked in a deep breath and did not retort. It was obvious that Baishua was speaking the truth. There was no room for rebuttal. If Baishua were to risk his life to kill someone, there were not many people in this world that he could not kill. Han Sanha could not help but smile as he thought about it. If so, I shall thank Hero Bai. Baishua's face twitched as he said, I dare not. The title of hero? I don't deserve it. Since the beginning of time, those with the title of hero have died a more tragic death. There are only a few who have a good ending. The group was speechless. How were they supposed to continue the conversation when you spoke like this? A few words and the conversation would be over. Regardless, Dongshuan's people were still suspicious of Baishua, the person before them, but they no longer suspected him of having the intention to assassinate the god of war. Han Sanha and his entourage had their reservations, but their desire to befriend the man had also grown after the initial fear had dissipated. After all, it would be strange if they did not want to befriend such a superb expert. Baishua had successfully joined Han Sanha's team, still looking stern and unsmiling, but the rest of the group was not bothered by it. An expert had always acted independently. This was how a superb expert should be. Moreover, this was the legendary White Blade Master, Baishua. It was to be expected that he would be arrogant and cold. No matter what, Han Sanha's confidence had increased for no reason. Now that Baishua was their bodyguard, whoever dared to provoke him would have to go through him first. It was truly not an easy task to get through. For the next 2 days, Baishua followed Han Sanha, paying his respects here and there, never leaving his side. He truly displayed the role of a superb expert's bodyguard. Although he did not smile, his methods were straightforward, adding a 99% sense of security to those who saw him. However, this great swordsman Baishua was not in a good mood during these few days. His expression was even worse, as if everyone he looked at owed him a huge sum of money. The group only thought that it was beneath his status to be a bodyguard, but they did not think too much about it. From the afternoon of the second day onwards, Han Sanha and the youth dressed in black brought their guards to the 1,000-feet lake. They went fishing with their fishing rods. Baishua followed them as if it was only natural. A night had passed, but they had not caught a single fish. Han Sanha was not discouraged, going back to rest for a while before going again in the afternoon. Since Han Sanha had rested, the guards had to rest as well. 2 of them were left to guard the door while the rest went to the room next door to meditate and recover their energy. I'm going out to settle some personal matters. Baishua stood up with a cold expression and spoke without thinking. No one knew who he was talking to, but he walked out without waiting for the others to speak. The long sword that he always carried with him was no longer worn on his waist but gripped in his hand. I won't wait any longer. Let's finish this quickly and leave. Once this is done, I'll never come to Tiantang City again in this lifetime. I can't even see that young Master Yin again. I don't want to die because of him. Chapter 206. 6th among the world swordsmen, what arrogance. Watching Baishua leave, a guard muttered softly with a pout. I wonder what the first place is like. Another person rolled his eyes. Look at this person's stance, he's just like the first. Another person craned his neck. Stop talking. It's his ability to be ranked 6th. Why aren't we ranked? Another person sighed. Luckily we're on the same side now. What's wrong with being a little more tolerant? Big brother is right. Were they really on the same side? Baishua strolled out of the inn, his eyes cold as he walked. His heart was filled with resentment. This reputed one shall never gamble again for the rest of my life. Baishua prayed in his heart. Many people in Tiantang City knew that Baishua had been following Han Sanha around for the past few days. This person was Han Sanha's personal guard. Seeing him walk over in his white robe, it was as if frost was descending on everyone's heads, causing them to move out of the way as soon as possible. They could not help but look at this fellow curiously. Where was he going? Why did it look like he was walking towards the palace? However, Baishua did not actually go to the palace. Instead, he walked to the front of a residence and stopped abruptly. The residence in front of Baishua was not small and it looked like it was newly built. It was probably because the mud used to build the walls was not completely dry yet. This was the residence of old Sir He Hanqing. It had been some time since He Hanqing's residence had been charred by Yun Yang's fire. The construction on the surface had already been completed. It had only been 3 days since Sir He had moved back to his residence from his temporary residence to the time when he had temporarily stayed elsewhere. He had not even warmed his seat yet. Baishua stood in front of the door, watching the inside coldly, not moving. The people inside were also looking curiously at this unmoving fellow who had come out of nowhere. What was wrong with this fellow? Was he mentally ill? Why is he standing in front of our house and not moving? Is he envious of this wonderful residence? Baishua's right hand moved, gripping the hilt of his sword as he said faintly, I'm sorry. I have to do this because of my superior's orders. Before he finished speaking, a snow-white sword light flashed like lightning in the night sky. Shwa. Old Master, he had just finished building the main gate, which had only been completed a few days ago, with a loud crash. Immediately, smoke and dust filled the sky. His white robes fluttered as Baishua entered with his sword in hand. Outsiders, move aside. Today I will only take He Hanqing's life. This was what Yun Yang wanted him to do. Yun Yang had requested to follow Han Sanha for 6 days and asked Baishua to assassinate He Hanqing after Han Sanha had left, but Baishua could not wait any longer. Hurry up and settle this matter. I'll leave immediately. From now on I will never return to Tiantang City. Baishua prayed in his heart. That bastard young Master Yun, I never want to see him ever again. Therefore Baishua had come impatiently. Moreover, he had openly and brazenly killed his way into He Hanqing's house in broad daylight. How could the people inside actually move aside? A large group of guards charged over with angry roars. Baishua's expression was cold as a murderous glint flashed in his eyes. His sword light flashed rapidly, circling the entire yard like a lightning bolt. Cries of agony rang out incessantly as the guards who had charged out collapsed to the ground. Many heads rolled like watermelons. Even if there were some survivors, they had broken limbs and were missing limbs. Fresh blood flowed into a small river on the ground. He Hanqing. Baishua's howl shook the 9 heavens. Come out and accept your death. Why let so many innocent people lose their lives? The only person I want to kill is yourself. A cold, hard voice that sounded like clashing metal spoke faintly. Did Han Sanha ask you to come? Baishua swung his sword in a circle, a bright radiance turning into a circle that shielded him within as he said faintly, No. I kill whoever I want. Do I need to be instructed by someone else? The person sneered, Baishua, no matter who asked you to come, you shall die here today. Before he finished his words, a sharp gust of wind came whistling. The shadow of a large saber flashed in midair. The saber's light stretched 100 feet long as it slashed down brilliantly. Shameless boasting. Surprise flashed in Baishua's eyes, but the long sword in his hand parried and pushed lightly. With a flash of his body, he had already charged over. It was a forceful attack, a preemptive strike against the enemy. Crack, crack, crack. Both of them were locked in a melee. Just as they were fighting fiercely, another person charged out from the side with a cold glint, aiming straight for Baishua's back. The attack came without a sound, like a phantom. It was so stealthy that one would not even know if he was dead. Unexpectedly, Baishua seemed to have eyes on his back. With a shake of the sword in his hand, he had already deflected the enemy's weapon behind him. Then the sword light flashed again, enveloping the person who came after him in the sword light. The battle between 2 people had turned into a 3-man battle. Although Baishua was fighting 1 against 2, he was still calm and had the upper hand. Then, another two cold glints came at him from the left and right. Surprise flashed in Bai Yishua's eyes, but his sword light expanded once more, like a 1,000-foot waterfall pouring down, enveloping the two people who had just charged out within the range of his sword light. Although Bai Yishua had the battle under his control once again, the surprise in his heart had grown exponentially. He Hanqing was only an old man from the empire of Yutong. Even if he had some reputation, what did he do to have so many pinnacle experts as his guards? This seems a little strange. Had he been tricked by that young Master Yun again? It was one thing for Bai Yishua to be puzzled, but he did not slacken his attacks. He was indeed worthy of the title of the world's sixth swordsman. His sword glinted with starlight, the cold glint was unstoppable as he suppressed all four of his opponents. They could only hold on strenuously under his sword, not losing. However, the sky was suddenly covered by darkness as a strong and heavy sound of wind breaking came crashing down. There was more? Bai Yishua was truly shocked now. He finally felt that it was not that something was amiss, but that something was terribly amiss. What did that bastard ask me to do? Did I not say that I would only kill an old scholar? Why did it feel like I had poked a hornet's nest? Wasn't this place a little too dangerous? A mere old scholar could actually have the protection of 5 pinnacle experts. Even a country's monarch could not compare to such a lineup. However, no matter how surprised he was, he still had to deal with the incoming attack. Bai Yishua's sword light flashed, the tip of his sword pointing directly at the incoming weapon. With a flip, Bai Yishua retreated 70 feet, his face flushed. The opponent's weapon was a gigantic sledgehammer. From the looks of it, it was at least 700 or 800 kilograms in weight. He really didn't expect that the attack from the sky would be a sledgehammer. This time he made a mistake in his prediction of the enemy and immediately suffered a great loss. His internal organs were also shaken and injured. However, the person in front of him didn't have it easy either. He grunted and coughed up a mouthful of blood. His entire body was sent flying high into the air due to the violent recoil, and the large hammer looked even more shocking to the eye. While the person wielding the hammer had successfully ambushed Bai Yishua and injured him, his cultivation base was much weaker than Bai Yishua's. The moment their weapons came into contact, the disparity in mystical qi levels had caused him to be severely injured as well. The severity of his injury was even more severe than Bai Yishua's. Being unexpectedly injured, Bai Yishua was in a hurry to recuperate and recover. He still had a strong opponent in his sights, so he dared not be injured. Unexpectedly, there was a sudden tremor from the ground. A pair of hands shot out from the ground and locked onto Bai Yishua's ankles like a pair of iron pincers, twisting them forcefully. On the ground, the 5 people who had just been pushed back by Bai Yishua pounced towards him in 5 different directions, as if they did not care for their lives. Bai Yishua was shocked, but he had no choice but to give it his all when his life was at stake. "Ha!" he exclaimed in a low voice. It was as if 1,000 mountains of ice and snow had exploded at the same time as a copious amount of cold air surged into the sky. The sudden outburst was the limit of Bai Yishua's lifetime cultivation base. The person who was underneath and had restrained Bai Yishua was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. He could no longer hold on to Bai Yishua's ankles with a pained grunt. His hands were torn apart, dripping with blood. A mouthful of blood spurted up from the ground, like a fountain of blood. The 5 people who had attacked at the same time grunted at the same time, retreating involuntarily. All of them paled. Although Bai Yishua was unexpectedly injured and was restrained by the people on the ground, his actual ability was far above these 6 people. The result of his outburst was as expected. It was incredibly valiant. However, Bai Yishua was not in a good state either. His ankles were bruised, and waves of excruciating pain came from his ankles from time to time. The outburst just now had also caused the mystical qi he had used to suppress his injuries to burst as well. His internal injuries had worsened due to the strong impact. Knowing that he was severely injured, Bai Yishua spun his sword and looked around, obviously wanting to break out of the encirclement quickly and leave this strange place of trouble. Who would have thought that there would be 2 more silhouettes pouncing over fearlessly amidst the tumbling dust and smoke? There were actually 2 more? What was more infuriating was that he had not even seen the face of the old scholar called He Hanqing after fighting for his life until now. What the F***ck was going on? The ground rumbled as if it had exploded again. It was the people who had charged out from underneath. Now there were 8 people attacking Bai Yishua at the same time. Bai Yishua fought back with his sword with all his might, trying his best to keep himself from falling. However, the 2 injuries he had sustained were more than just one injury on top of another. He was gradually losing his strength. The 8 people's weapons consisted of sabers, swords, spears, hammers, whips, staffs, short swords and a ribbon. These 8 different weapons were of different lengths, light and heavy, hard and soft, yet they worked together seamlessly and tacitly. The longer the fight went on, the more intricate it became. Baishue could not help but grumble inwardly. He had probably been tricked. Today's 4th update. Seeking monthly votes. 410,000 words on the shelves. Today is the 23rd. 23 days, 230,000 words have been updated. It's not that I'm flaunting myself, but there aren't many like me after so many years, am I right? Chapter 207. Baishue could not help but feel regret. He should have been more ruthless when the battle had begun and killed 1 or 2 of them with a brutal blow. Even if they were severely injured, he would not have fallen into such a dire situation. With the 8 men's teamwork, he would have needed a long battle to kill 1 or 2 of them even if he had been in perfect condition. It would have been impossible for him to kill all 8 of them. But now the situation is completely reversed and it's very dangerous. Of the 8 people on the other side, many of them were injured, but when they cooperated with each other, they were incomparably tight, and he couldn't find any weak link. F***ck I've been tricked again? Baishue resisted and retaliated with all his might, feeling resentful. That bastard had said it was a simple mission, but he had only asked him to kill an old scholar. This place was obviously more dangerous than any dragon's lair or tiger's den he had ever been to. It was much more dangerous. It was at this moment that an even greater sense of danger rose within him. Baishue roared, his sword splitting into 8 rays of sword light to repel the 8 men at the same time. Only then did he turn to look. He saw an elder with a head full of white hair standing in the yard, looking at him with his arms behind his back. The elder exuded an aura that was as imposing as a mountain and as deep as the ocean. It was only then that Baishue was truly shocked. Based on the aura alone, he could tell that the other party's cultivation base was actually higher than his own when he was at his peak. Who was this person? The elder spoke faintly. This old and useless one is he Hanqing himself. I wonder why great swordsman Baishue wants to kill me? Baishue's heart sank coldly. **ck. He had been tricked. That pretty boy wasn't a good person after all. The pretty boy didn't have a good heart indeed. A transcendent expert like this, one who's beyond his own limits with 8 powerful guards, actually wants me to assassinate him single-handedly. He was King asking his father to die. Now that things had come to this, he had to make a swift decision and leave immediately. Otherwise he might really die here. Thinking about it, Baishue roared. Suddenly, he spun rapidly like a spinning top. The sword light around him flickered with a cold gleam that grew more intense. At the same time, the cold wind at the peak of the snowy mountain began to howl fiercely. Baishue howled, "Those who stand in my way shall die." Before his voice echoed in the air, he was already there. Baishue soared into the sky like a roller, charging towards the 3 men who were standing on top of the wall. Life or death, it all depended on this. If he couldn't make it out this time, then he would really have to die here this time. The 5 people around him roared at the same time. Their sabers, spears, swords, hammers, and cudgels all smashed towards the rolling sword light. It was obviously meant to obstruct the enemy and diminish the sharpness of Baishue's sword. Baishue did not evade the 5 incoming attacks. He did not change his direction either, flying forward like a long dragon. All the weapons that crashed against the sword light that was the embodiment of man and sword could only cause a ripple like the surface of water. They could not stop the momentum of the attack at all. "Get out of the way, let him go," Hanqing shouted with a frown. His actual cultivation base was higher than Baishue's, so he could see clearly that Baishue was risking his life. If the 3 subordinates on top of the wall were to intercept him forcefully, there was a high chance that they could stop Baishue, but the 3 men would die without a doubt. In addition, they would have to bring in 2 or 3 more people who would participate in the ambush. He could not afford such a loss right now. Ever since he had been severely injured by Ling Xiaozue, he had been severely injured and could only suppress his opponents with his aura. He could not fight at all. The 3 men on top of the wall grunted and parted to the sides simultaneously. However, the weapons in their hands had left their hands, thrown out in a desperate manner. They collided with the sword light that flashed by. The sword light scattered once more as Baishue spat a mouthful of blood into the air. However, the sword light moved even faster, like a shooting star streaking across the sky, disappearing in a flash. In the blink of an eye, the sky returned to silence. At the very last moment, Baishue turned back to look and was relieved when he saw that Hanqing had not made a move. As long as this old man doesn't make a move, I have an 80% higher chance of leaving this place alive today. Bai Yixue had already disappeared into the distance, his speed like a shooting star chasing after the moon. All 8 of them knew that they could not catch up to him. Besides, the others' actual cultivation base was far above any of them. Even if 1 or 2 of them managed to catch up to him, they would only end up as food for the other. There's no need to chase after him. He Hanqing sighed, his brows locked in a deep frown. Bai Yixue is already severely injured. He has obviously lost his composure by breaking out at the last moment. A guard said, even if he survives, I believe he won't be able to do much for the time being. But why did he come? The spearhead is directed at old he himself. The other guard looked at he Hanqing in confusion. I heard that Bai Yixue is currently Han Sanha's personal guard, tasked to ensure Han Sanha's safety when he's in Yutong. He's always with Han Sanha? But why does this guard of Han Sanha want to assassinate you, boss? Another guard asked. He Hanqing kept quiet for a bit and said, Ah-san, bring my name card and invite Han Sanha here for a talk. Ah-san chuckled humorlessly and said, Boss, this is a difficult matter. If Han Sanha did it, how would he dare come? If he didn't do it, he wouldn't even come. He Hanqing said faintly, wrong? Whether he did it or not, he will definitely come. A gloomy black air flashed in his eyes, it was an eerie murderous intent. He said faintly, even if this wasn't Han Sanha's doing, he must know what's going on. He needs to know. He has to know. At this moment, he Hanqing's voice was several times colder, like the gloomy cries of ghosts drifting out from hell. Han Sanha had just laid down for his afternoon nap. Before he could fall asleep, the door to the tower to heaven in was kicked open. A fearless voice hollered, where is the empire of Dongxuan's Han Sanha? Han Sanha's 8 guards stood up at the same time, following the voice. Looking at the 2 people who had entered the tower to heaven in, they were enraged. Who are you? How dare you make such a ruckus? The person who had just arrived had called out Marshal Han's name so boldly, he had no manners at all. The person at the door said coldly, I'm here on old Sir He's order to invite Han Sanha and Marshal Han to the residence for a chat. As he spoke, a name card was passed over. Han Sanha was surprised to see the name card that had been sent in. Yi Hanqing? Why would the leader of the literati in the Empire of Yutong, the grandmaster of Confucianism of his generation, come looking for him for no reason? Besides, his attitude was impolite. Not only was this strange, but it was also strange. It was odd. No matter what, Han Sanha had to go to He Hanqing's invitation. No matter how he criticized the other party's invitation method, it was still a servant who had come to send an invitation. Just based on the fact that the other party was a master of literature and a leader of Confucianism, as well as the fact that he had taken the initiative to invite Han Sanha had no choice but to go. It would be impolite if he did not go, and it was not just Han Sanha who would be impolite, but the entire empire of Dongxian. After all, Han Sanha's official identity was the representative of the empire of Dongxuan's military. However, when Han Sanha saw He Hanqing, he immediately understood that he had made a mistake coming here. No matter how impolite it was still better than entering a dangerous place and facing danger head-on. The meeting between the 2 of them proceeded swiftly. Once the conversation started, He Hanqing went straight to the main topic. I'm ashamed to say this, but this old man was assassinated just now. I'm sure Marshal Han doesn't know about this yet, He Hanqing said softly as he brewed tea. Han Sanha was taken aback. Assassination? Just as it happened, He Hanqing's men had already arrived at the inn. Han Sanha was in the Empire of Yutong after all, how could he be so well informed? Therefore he definitely did not know about this news. However, why would old He ask such a question? Someone actually dared to assassinate old He, how audacious. I wonder if the assassin has been caught? Han Sanha asked, concerned. With his experience, how could he not tell that there was a deeper meaning in He Hanqing's words? He could also see that He Hanqing's expression did not seem to be in a good mood, but Han Sanha would never have thought that this matter would be related to him, not even in his wildest dreams. Caught? How could I have caught him? He Hanqing shook his head and sighed. That assassin was confident in his high cultivation base. When he came to assassinate me, he did it openly and openly. If it weren't for the few righteous men here who risked their lives to protect me, I wouldn't have been able to prevent the assassin from taking my muddle-headed head. A direct assassination? The assassin is really bold. Do you know the identity of the assassin? He should have been arrested and brought to justice. Han Sanha exclaimed. He was even more confused about He Hanqing's purpose in inviting him here. What did provoking an assassin have to do with him, a marshal of another country? Was the assassin sent by him? Arrest? It's easier said than done. This old man is a weak scholar, my knowledge of martial cultivation is shallow. I only remember that the assassin had introduced himself as Bai Yixue and that this has nothing to do with anyone else. He only wants to kill me, he Hanqing. The righteous men who protected me just now said that this person is one of the top swordsmen in this world, one of the top swordsmen in the world. It was only a fluke that they could barely deal with him. Old he explained. His eyes that seemed to be blurry from old age were gleaming with an icy chill as he looked at Han Sanha's face. Bai Yixue? Is it really him? Han Sanha was dumbfounded, asking subconsciously. Is Marshal Han surprised as well? It's really this legendary pinnacle of swordsmanship. He Hanqing said warmly, I just don't know how this old man offended this expert, to actually be like this. Swoosh. Chapter 208. Han Sanha finally understood why He Hanqing had invited him here. He would never have thought that He Hanqing would encounter an assassination attempt and that the assassin was actually Bai Yixue. Bai Yixue was now his guard in name. Who else would He Hanqing look for if not him? Han Sanha sucked in a long breath and chuckled humorlessly, so this is why Elder He has sought me out. He Hanqing's eyes that seemed to be blurry from old age scanned Han Sanha and said evenly, there seems to be one less guard by Marshal Han's side. Bai Yixue has indeed been my guard for 3 days, Han Sanha said without hesitation. He Hanqing chuckled. Then what does Marshal Han want to tell me? Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. If I say that this has nothing to do with me, will Elder He believe me? He Hanqing said, I've often heard that Marshal Han's words carry weight and you never go back on them. This old and useless one shouldn't have doubted you. It would be fine if it was only this old and useless one's life, but the few righteous men around this old and useless one wouldn't want to watch this old and useless one die. This old and useless one doesn't want to chill the hearts of the righteous men, so I'm just asking for Marshal Han to produce something believable. Han Sanha felt a splitting headache. His question of whether he believed him or not was his last struggle. He was betting that Elder He would give up on pursuing the matter due to his identity. He knew that the other party would definitely want evidence, but he was still hoping for a fluke. It was a pity that things did not turn out as he wished. It was inevitable that he would pursue the matter. According to Marshal Han, Bai Yixue only became your guard 4 days ago? He Hanqing asked, may I ask Marshal Han with Bai Yixue's identity and background, why would he be willing to be your guard? The question was straight to the point. With Bai Yixue's swordsmanship cultivation base and status, he did not even care about important positions like a nation's protector or the commander of the Imperial Guards, much less a marshal's guard. Was Han Sanha not being a little too arrogant? Han Sanha chuckled dryly. He only said that he was entrusted by someone to protect me? He Hanqing asked, may I ask who entrusted him with this? I don't know. When Han Sanha uttered the word, his eyes were almost closed, his heart filled with bitterness. He knew that he had been tricked unknowingly. You don't even know who sent him, yet Marshal Han is so at ease to keep him by his side. He Hanqing chuckled, is Marshal Han's heart big or broad? Han Sanha chuckled bitterly. I know it's hard to believe but this is the truth. This marshal has no other proof. He Hanqing smiled and said, it seems that Marshal Han really has nothing else to say to me? Han Sanha said seriously, old He, my life hasn't been mediocre. The things I've done aren't to the point where I dare not admit to them. I really don't know anything about this. Completely unaware. Old He chuckled meaningfully and said, does this mean that Marshal Han has no idea where Bai Yixue has gone to now? Han Sanha sighed helplessly. No matter how he tried to explain, it would be futile. Based on the current situation, the facts spoke louder than words. This black pot was firmly pinned on his back. Looking at the chilling glare in Old He's eyes, Han Sanha felt helpless. He stood up to bid farewell and said, this is all I can say. If Old He has nothing else, I shall take my leave now. The eyes of the two people behind He Hanqing gleamed sharply as they said indifferently, could it be that Marshal Han's subordinates have done such a rebellious thing, and Marshal Han is only going to give a few words of explanation, and you're thinking of leaving? Han Sanha sucked in a deep breath, suppressing the rage within him and said, does Old He intend to make me stay here today? He Hanqing smiled faintly. Of course not. Send the guest away. Han Sanha stood up to bid farewell. He Hanqing did not move, remaining seated as he said darkly, I wonder when Marshal Han will return. The martial world is treacherous and treacherous. Please take care. Han Sanha's footsteps paused. How could he not hear the heavy threat in the words? He said faintly, "Thank you for your concern, old he. I will say this solemnly, this has nothing to do with me." Han Qing did not speak as if he had not heard anything. A cold smirk hung on the corners of his lips. When Han Sanha walked out of the residence of his expression was dark. This kind of injustice, this kind of inexplicable blame, how could it fall from the sky? It was simply unimaginable and inconceivable. Who was it that was plotting against him? An old scholar who has long since left his position. How dare he threaten me like this? Does he really think he's somebody? Han Sanha closed his eyes and sighed. He wondered if he should return home in advance. Although Han Qing had not stepped foot in the imperial court for many years, his influence on Yutong's royalty was still considerable. If he spoke to His Majesty, Han Sanha would not be killed just like that, but it would be difficult for him to do anything in the future. With such an enemy lurking in the dark, it would be difficult for him to achieve anything in Yutong. There was no point in staying any longer. Han Sanha heaved a long sigh towards the sky. He had always prided himself on being able to predict the enemy's moves, taking every conceivable possibility into account and planning before taking action. However, ever since he came to Yutong, he realized that everything that had happened was beyond his expectations. Many of the arrangements he had prepared beforehand had all been for naught. It was the first time in Han Sanha's life that he felt like he had used up all his strength or that he could not exert his strength. He turned back to look at the residence of he subconsciously, thinking that Han Qing's incident had rendered him speechless. He did not even understand who was plotting against him. Those who were involved in the gambling were already on their way back home. Han Sanha had no idea what was happening to them. Even if he wanted to discuss it with someone, there was no one to ask. That night, Han Sanha and the youth dressed in black were still holding onto their fishing rods, sitting by the 1,000-foot lake, fishing quietly. Behind them, the 8 guards stood guard in various positions. The night was dark and quiet. "Gugu, are you sure you can catch it?" Han Sanha said in a low voice. "I heard that Ling Xiaozue has been here before this and has probably left with his catch. With the Kirin fish's habits, it won't be easy for it to take the bait again within a short period of time." The youth dressed in black, Gugu's tanned face was filled with confidence. There are no absolutes in this world. Ling Xiaozue was able to catch it mostly because of his patience and luck. Of course, it's hard for him to catch it twice. It's true that ordinary people won't be able to catch it again. However, the bait I'm using is a special bait that my master has been researching for 100 years. It's specially made to target this unusual fish. My master had caught more than 10 Kirin fish consecutively in a day at Blackwater Lake. The bait is irresistible to the Kirin fish, it won't fail. That's great. It's a pity that the Kirin fish in Blackwater Lake is hard to catch. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to come all the way here, Gugu said regretfully. Han Sanha said regretfully as well. The Blackwater Lake is now extinct for the Kirin fish. Gugu said, "It's not to the extent of extinction. There's still the king of the Kirin fish in Blackwater Lake. There's still room for reproduction. It's a pity that the level of the king of the Kirin fish can't be caught no matter what. Otherwise, the king of the Kirin fish would be more than 100 times better than the ordinary Kirin fish." Han Sanha said, "Is that so?" Gugu sighed. "Master's secret bait contains the fragrance of the fish's soul. Other than the king of the fish, it's an irresistible temptation to the other Kirin fish. We only need to be patient. No matter what, there'll be a Kirin fish that will take the bait." Han Sanha's expression that had been gloomy for days finally showed a hint of a smile. "That's great. When we get the Kirin fish, we'll return immediately." Fishing at the 1,000-foot lake? Yun Yang's eyes widened as he read the message from the 9 heavens dictum in his hand. Han Sanha was going to the 1,000-foot lake to fish? He had traveled thousands of miles to come here, but now he was fishing every day. How could he have so much leisure time? In spite of this, Yun Yang understood the situation quickly. The main purpose of fishing at the 1,000-foot lake must be the Kirin fish. However, he did not expect that one of Han Sanha's main goals in coming to Yutong would be this as well. Yun Yang stood up and paced around, his brows knitted together. According to what he knew and the Kirin fish's habits that Ling Xiaozue had described the other day, the Kirin fish in the 1,000-foot lake had already been caught by him once. It would be impossible for anyone else to catch it within a short period of time. However, it was impossible that Han Sanha did not know this, yet he still wanted to try. He must have had something else to rely on. It was better to be safe than sorry. If there was really an accident, the aftermath would be long. All in all, Yunyang did not want Han Sanhe to accomplish anything in Yutong. What he wanted to accomplish was what Yunyang wanted to destroy. Thinking about it, Yunyang turned into a cloud of smoke and vanished in the blink of an eye. Only the soft sound of the wind could be heard in the sky. In the 1,000-feet lake, a strange fragrance slowly spread in the water. In the depths of the water, there was already a faint flash of rainbow. The Kirin fish had already begun to move. The wind blew. A soft sound that was barely audible came from afar, as if something had entered the water. Han Sanhe frowned and said, "Why does it sound like someone has entered the water?" A guard behind him bowed and said, "Marshal has good hearing. Someone has indeed jumped into the water on the other shore. However, the other side is 10 miles away from here. The impact is minimal, Marshal need not worry too much." Han Sanhe nodded and continued fishing. The youth dressed in black was even more composed, his lean body shrouded in a loose black robe. He was like a statue, not even the sound of his breathing could be heard. Up until this point, the situation of ordinary fish biting the hook had become less and less frequent. It had been a full hour since the last success and the float had not moved. Han Sanhe and the youth dressed in black were fully focused, knowing clearly that the Kirin fish in the water had most likely begun to move. The divine fish moved while the ordinary fish retreated. In other words, the moment the Kirin fish took the bait was only a matter of time. Chapter 209. Han Sanhe and Yunyang waited with bated breath. Yunyang, who was under the water, had already dived into the deeper waters soundlessly. Like a large fish, he swam leisurely in the deep waters, moving more nimbly than when he was on land. This was not an illusion. Once Yunyang entered the deep waters, he could feel the difference. He did not feel suffocated or uncomfortable underwater. Instead, he felt at ease, safe and joyful. The lake water around him seemed to have become a part of him. There was no longer any gap between them. In the water, he breathed freely, his limbs moved according to his will, and the harmony was indescribable. In fact, Yunyang felt that he was even more comfortable on the ground right now. Every pore on his body showed a comfortable feeling, as if they had been opened. He could do whatever he wanted with just a thought. As he reached out his hand, he traveled more than 1,000 feet at the bottom of the lake without making a sound. There was not even the slightest movement in the water beside him. It was already a rare miracle, but not only did the fishes around Yunyang not avoid him, they even swam around him to keep him company, but they maintained a certain distance from him. It was a strict suppression of their levels. When he did not exude his aura, all the schools of fish that he met as he swam were silently escorting him, or rather, they were lining up to welcome him. The feeling was marvelous. Perhaps, it was an indescribable sense of wonder. Suddenly, a rainbow shadow flashed and a Kirin fish appeared in front of him. It gently swayed its tail as if it was confirming something. Then, with a wave of its tail, it rushed into his arms and swam back and forth in his arms. From time to time, it would rub its face and body against his, full of joy. Yunyang flashed a sincere, gentle smile, his heart growing calmer. Following the flow, he dove down quickly. At this point, many of the rainbow silhouettes had been attracted by the strange fragrance and were about to be unable to resist it. However, when Yunyang arrived, all of them followed him back without exception, swimming towards the deep waters without any hesitation. The 1,000-feet lake is indeed as bottomless as the rumors say. How is this just 1,000 feet? Yunyang dived all the way down, but he still could not see the bottom of the lake even after several thousand feet. After a while, Yunyang was shocked to realize that there was a bottomless abyss under the lake. About 4,000 to 5,000 feet into the abyss, he could see other Qilin fish swimming about. Another 3,000 feet down, there were more and more Kirin fish. They swam back and forth like many rainbows dancing and lingering in the air. There were even a few Kirin fish that swam out and wiggled around Yunyang, as if expressing their closeness. Yunyang chuckled. He had yet to reach the bottom of the abyss, but he could already see a huge hole on the side. Countless Kirin fish were swimming in and out of it. That should be the nest of the Kirin fish. Based on Yunyang's estimation, the number of Qilin fish here was shocking. There were at least 1,000 of them. The largest Qilin fish that he had caught earlier finally appeared. When its gaze met Yunyang's, it became lively and rushed over, rubbing its lips against Yunyang's face with indescribable joy. Yunyang realized that the Qilin fish that he had let go did not appear sickly or weak after spitting out their essence. Instead, they had grown much bigger. Although it had only been a short time, their bodies had grown at least twice as big as before. It seemed that the chi of vitality that he had given them was indeed what the Qilin fish needed. It was even their favorite and most effective supplement. Yun Yang wanted to communicate with the Qilin fish at once, but then he realized that even though he was compatible with the water, he was still a human after all. How could the Qilin fish understand his words? Due to the language barrier, Yun Yang released his deific consciousness in an attempt to communicate with the Qilin fish. Deific consciousness was an ability that all living beings who cultivated in this world could obtain. It was the same for humans and fishes. With the Qilin fish king's level, it might even possess deific consciousness. Sensing Yun Yang's deific consciousness, the Qilin fish king was stunned for a moment. Its tail stopped moving and it lifted its head to look at Yun Yang, deep in thought. Then Yun Yang's deific consciousness received a message of? Yun Yang could not help but be overjoyed. Could it really be like this? The Qilin fish king had cultivated deific consciousness? Although he was not sure if the Qilin fish king had deific consciousness, this was not the main point at the moment. Yun Yang communicated with the deific consciousness once more. The anglers above have ill intentions. The unique fragrance is a bait. Don't go up and try to control yourselves in the future. Don't go up and eat the things that suddenly appear. No matter how many good things there are up there, don't be tempted. Good things that fall from the sky must be accompanied by danger. If you can't resist it, you'll lose your life. After communicating with the fish 7 to 8 times, the Qilin fish king seemed to have understood. It flipped its body in the water angrily, its tail coming out with a splash. Then the Qilin fish king opened its mouth. Yun Yang could feel a strange frequency emanating from it. Then, swoosh, 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 countless Qilin fish gathered from all directions. Even some Qilin fish that were only the length of a thumb and might have just hatched came over, forming a black mass. Yun Yang, who was floating in the water, could not help but gape as he watched the mystical scene unfold. The kingfish was floating high on a rock as if it was sitting on a throne. Below it was a crowd of Kirin fish. The biggest ones were at the front, and the rest were lined up according to their size. It was very orderly and there was not the slightest bit of chaos. At the very back were the newly born fish seedlings. All the Qilin fish were lined up neatly and tidily, lifting their heads to look at the Qilin fish king above. Then the Qilin fish began to lecture. Yun Yang did not know what exactly it said, but he could feel the strange frequency fluctuating continuously. However, he did not understand a single word. Just because he could not understand it did not mean that the fish could not as well. The fishes below swayed their tails uneasily. After another wave of fluctuation, all the Qilin fish dispersed. All the Qilin fish that weighed less than 5 to 6 caddies were chased into the water flow inside the cave while the larger Qilin fish stayed nearby. There were actually 8 Qilin fish that weighed dozens of caddies swimming back and forth at the entrance of the cave, but they never left the direction of the cave. Once other Qilin fish swam there, they would be chased back immediately. Yun Yang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. The Qilin fish could actually do this? This was no different from humans setting up their armies and waiting for battle. Whether the Qilin fish king had cultivated deific consciousness or not, the fact that the Qilin fish possessed such high intelligence meant that it lived up to its reputation as a heaven and earth species. It was extraordinary indeed. Yun Yang had achieved his goal. After this incident, Han Sanhe would definitely have no chance. Naturally, Yun Yang was about to return. Before Yun Yang left, he had informed the Qilin fish king with his deific consciousness, telling it that he wanted to return. The Qilin fish king panicked, appearing in front of Yun Yang with a swoosh to block his way. Its tail swayed wildly before it bumped its large head against Yun Yang's chest. "You're not letting me go? Or do you have some other idea?" Yun Yang pointed at his own nose. The Qilin fish king sent out a vague thought before it nudged Yun Yang with its head, pulling him backwards. "You want to bring me somewhere?" Yun Yang could vaguely understand what was going on. Turning around, he swam in the direction of the Qilin fish king. The Qilin fish king hopped happily before it came to Yun Yang with a swish of its tail, leading him towards the other end. After a while it would turn back to look. Seeing that Yun Yang was still following, it twisted its body happily and led the way again. Yun Yang followed the Qilin fish king and had unknowingly swum dozens of miles. His surroundings grew darker. If Yun Yang was not in sync with the water now, even moving would be a problem. Along the way he did not even come across a Qilin fish, much less an ordinary fish. However, the further they walked, the wider the lake became. Yun Yang even suspected that the 1,000-feet lake was actually connected to the ocean, judging from the way they were walking. Not only was the water getting wider, but the walls of the cave were also getting weirder and weirder. The kingfish's body was shining brightly, but it couldn't emit any light at all. It was all dark and gray. After a while, a faint light appeared in front of them. Yunyang could not help but feel invigorated. Although Yunyang did not care much about his surroundings as long as he was human, he would prefer a place with light. No one liked pure darkness. The Chilean Fish King increased its speed as well, swimming forward with a swoosh. Finally, after passing through a patch of water plants that looked like ribbons, Yunyang felt a sudden brightness in front of him. When Yunyang came here, he realized that the water level was only above his knees. It did not affect him standing up and walking. However, the Chilean Fish King's body was relatively large, so it had to swim with its body flat to maintain its movement in such shallow water. For its current size, it was rather arduous. Yunyang raised his head and looked into the distance. Right in front of him, there was a black stone platform that was only slightly protruding from the water. There was only a strange rock with a pit in the middle on the stone platform. As for the pit, there was nothing at all. The Chilean Fish King supported itself up with its tail with difficulty. It turned its head and gestured to Yunyang. Yunyang was taken aback, but he did not hesitate, wading through the water. When he came to the front of the strange rock and studied it carefully, he realized that the pit was not completely empty. There was a faint layer of mist that was emitting rainbow colors within. It was really just a thin layer. As long as it was a little further away, it would not be visible. Chapter 210. Yunyang looked at the kingfish in confusion, not knowing why it had brought him here. He dared not act recklessly, waiting for the Fish King to give him a further hint. The kingfish slapped the surface of the water with its tail happily, splashing water everywhere. It then swam over and leaned on Yunyang's leg, not moving an inch as if it was resting. Resting? Yunyang did not know whether to laugh or cry. Why did you go through so much trouble to bring me here? What exactly do you want? You can't be resting on me like this, can you? Just when Yunyang was at a loss, he felt an indescribable pressure descend upon him. It felt as if the sky had suddenly collapsed. At the same time, there was an inexplicable sense of palpitation as if the ground beneath his feet was trembling inexplicably. The surface of the water rippled slightly. The kingfish snuggled closer to Yunyang as if it was comforting him. Don't be afraid, it's all right. Yunyang did not know whether to laugh or to cry. Fortunately, after a while, he saw a ray of light shoot out from the stone wall above. It was a pure purple light that grew bigger and bigger like a bubble that kept expanding. Slowly, it grew to the size of a human head and hung above the pit. A series of gurgling sounds resounded from the ground. Then, a colorless gas suddenly emerged from the pit and shot upwards. Coincidentally, the gas hit the purple ball that was suspended in midair. With a crisp puff sound, the smoke suddenly surged in all directions like a sharp arrow. After the smoke arrow was refracted, its momentum did not diminish. It struck the walls of the cave, causing the walls in all directions to vibrate. After the smoke arrow was rebounded a second time, it once again formed a new ball of smoke above the pit. However, this ball of smoke was no longer colorless. It had turned into a colorful glow. It flowed and circled faintly. It was slow, but it was continuous. Seeing this, the kingfish let out a shrill cry as if it was cheering. It nudged Yunyang's waist with its head, gesturing for him to move forward. You mean for me to collect this? Yunyang asked, pointing at the colorful ball in shock. At this moment, the ball of colorful smoke had already begun to dissipate. The Fish King seemed to be anxious. It rushed over again and again, raised its head, opened its mouth and took a deep breath. A large cloud of smoke rushed into the kingfish's mouth. It turned to look at Yunyang, its tail slapping the surface of the water impatiently. Quick, do as I say. Yunyang grinned. After all, he did not know what it was, so he dared not move recklessly. However, looking at the king Chilean fish's relaxed expression, he guessed that the smoke would not be anything bad. Doubtfully, he moved closer, opened his mouth and inhaled. Who knew that when he inhaled, the moment the colorful smoke entered his mouth, Yunyang felt the mystical chi in his dantian vibrate abruptly. Then, a strange sensation arose, filling his entire body with a warm, indescribably comfortable atmosphere. In the deific consciousness space, Emi that was wriggling around suddenly quietened down. Its vines that had never stopped waving froze in the air, its leaves curling up as well. In the next moment, it unfurled itself abruptly and began wriggling violently like never before. Aya, Aya, Emi looked like it was about to die from anxiety. The Fish King only inhaled 3 times, which was less than 1/10 of the entire ball's volume. After that, it stopped inhaling and laid down in the water. It even closed its eyes, obviously digesting the power contained in the smoke. 3 mouthfuls was obviously the highest it could withstand. Yunyang could already feel Emi's urgency. After a moment of hesitation, he channeled his qi into his dantian and sucked in with all his might. Using his mystical qi as a foundation, Yun-Yang's suction was not only stronger than the first time, it was even stronger than the kingfish's absorption. The colorful smoke ball turned into a stream of smoke at once, slowly entering Yun-Yang's mouth. Emmy was getting more and more ecstatic, wriggling and twisting its body. Aya, Aya. At the same time, he hurriedly absorbed the colorful smoke into his spiritual sense space and placed it around his plant. The two translucent green leaves kept rolling up, unrolling, rolling up again and unrolling again. The vines waved in the air. With the cooperation of the three parties, it only took a moment for the rainbow-colored smoke, which was originally the size of a head, to be completely absorbed. Even the thin layer of smoke that had accumulated in the pit on the stage was gone. Peace returned to the surroundings. Yun-Yang could only feel that he was different from before, but he could not pinpoint exactly what was different. He was a little confused. In spite of this, Amy in the space was in a state of satisfaction that it had never experienced before. It wriggled around endlessly, its soft cries of Aya echoing endlessly. After confirming that the seven-colored smoke had been completely collected, Amy wasted no time, absorbing the seven-colored smoke into its plant at once. Its thin and slender leaves were gradually thickening, the area of the leaves expanding as well. Its color had turned into a dark green that was close to black. It was a sign that the plant was extremely healthy. Other than that, the vines grew thicker as well, their length almost doubled. Yun-Yang watched the changes with a dumbstruck expression. He was finally sure that the mysterious colorful smoke was a rare treasure. It seemed that he had encountered a legendary opportunity today. Yun-Yang had never seen any heaven and earth treasure that could make Emmy undergo such a rapid and shocking change. Emmy was a species of boundless power that was born from the power of heaven and earth. Ordinary heaven and earth treasures might not even be able to elevate it by a level. However, under this strange smoke there was such a huge change. Therefore one could imagine what kind of good stuff this smoke was. In addition, his meridians seemed to have been strengthened inexplicably as well. Yun-Yang tried cultivating and realized that the toughness of his meridians was at least 10 times stronger than before, perhaps even more. Most of the energy contained in the colorful smoke had been absorbed and stored by Emmy, yet he could still achieve such a huge improvement. How far had all the energy of the colorful smoke gone? In spite of this, Yun-Yang only knew why but not how. He had no idea what was happening in front of him. What kind of smoke was this? How could it contain such a miraculous and vigorous power? Why did such a thing happen? This was definitely not man-made but a miraculous phenomenon that only appeared after some kind of miraculous coincidence by the power of heaven's creation. This was heaven's creation, the mystical wonder of God. It was not something that could be achieved by a human. The king of Qilin fish had already woken up from the absorption of the colorful smoke. It was obvious that it had improved as it dashed around in the shallow water like a horse. Water splashed everywhere. Yun-Yang noticed that the rainbow color of the king of Qilin fish seemed to have deepened. It looked like the colorful smoke was extraordinarily useful to the Qilin fish as well. The king of Qilin fish brought Yun-Yang all the way here and happily brought him out again. Along the way, its fat tail splashed water everywhere. It was obviously in high spirits and full of pride. Halfway through the journey, Yun-Yang laughed and hugged the king of Qilin fish's head, rubbing it affectionately and transferring a gust of air of vitality into the king of Qilin fish. The king Qilin fish was delighted by this gift. When it realized that the air of vitality that Yun-Yang had given it this time was actually more than the last time, it began to spin around in the water like it was dancing. With a swoosh, it had gone thousands of feet away. With another swoosh, it had returned, and with another swoosh, it had gone out again. The man and the fish left the unpredictable abyss in their respective states of joy and returned to the 1,000-feet lake. Yun-Yang was really about to leave now. The king of Qilin fish followed behind him reluctantly for a long time. Go back. Yun-Yang patted the king of Qilin fish's head and comforted it. I'll come again in the future. We'll meet again. This sentence was not false. How could Yun-Yang not come when there was such a magical creature here? Even if Yun-Yang did not come himself, Amy would pester him to come often. The king of Qilin fish rubbed its huge rainbow fish head against Yun-Yang's chest like a spoiled child, pestering an adult to not leave. Its infatuation was different from Emmy's, but it touched Yun-Yang just as much. It only stopped reluctantly after being comforted repeatedly. Watching Yun-Yang leave from a distance, it lay there and did not move for a long time. Yun-Yang's fortuitous encounter under the water this time was indeed a great benefit, although he did not realize it himself. However, Han Sanha and the youth dressed in black who were by the shore looked miserable. The stage of ordinary fish biting the bait had passed, so it should be the Chilean fish's turn. However, for some unknown reason, the ordinary fish species that should not be attacking them had begun to attack in batches. Carps, grass carps, snakeheads, silver carps, and so on and so forth. The youth dressed in black's fish soul incense was specially made for the Chilean fish. If it could attract the king of fishes like the Chilean fish, it was only natural that it would be more enticing to the ordinary fish species. What was worse was that even though there were plenty of fish species attacking them, there were no bigger fish. They were all small fish that weighed about half a caddy, biting the bait in a frenzy. There was not much of the priceless fish soul incense, but all of it had been fed to these small fish. In the end, when the bait of the fish soul incense had been used up, there was not even a shadow of the Chilean fish to be seen. This matter was really too strange. It was too *king strange. What exactly was the problem? Chapter 211. Han Sanha and the youth in black, who knew that they had lost everything and their hopes were dashed, looked at each other speechlessly. Could it be that there are no Chilean fish in this 1,000-feet lake? The youth in black looked indignant as he uttered an answer that he himself did not believe. Han Sanha frowned without saying a word. He was puzzled as well, but he did not want to fool himself. If there are no Chilean fish in the 1,000-feet lake, why did Ling Xiaozui come here specifically to fish? The youth in black mumbled to himself, according to my master, what Ling Xiaozui needs the most is the Chilean fish. Wherever Ling Xiaozui stops to fish, there will definitely be Chilean fish. There's no doubt about this. Our fish soul fragrance is the most precious medicine in the sect. It's much more advanced than the bait Ling Xiaozui uses, and it's specially made to target the Chilean fish. It doesn't make sense that he can fish them but we can't. It doesn't make sense. The youth in black felt like he was about to break down. The effect of the fish soul fragrance was so potent, its rarity was naturally the same. Whether it was the ingredients or the difficulty of its production, it was beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. He had brought so much fish soul fragrance out this time, thinking that he could accomplish something big in one fell swoop and harvest a large number of Chilean fish, allowing his cultivation base to take a leap. Who would have thought that they would all be fed to the small fish? If this were to be brought back to the sect, even if his master doted on him and would not really blame him, he would definitely become a laughingstock in the sect, an eternal joke. Did you know that Master's precious Gugu brought the fish soul fragrance out and caught a bunch of small fish? Aha! I'm delighted to hear that. Gugu felt like she was going crazy when she thought of the scene. Can we be sure that Ling Xiaozui really caught the Chilean fish in the 1,000-feet lake? Han Sanha asked softly, could it be that Ling Xiaozui didn't catch any as well? The youth in black fell silent. It was unclear whether Ling Xiaozui had caught the fish or not. After all, no one dared to look for Ling Xiaozui to verify the matter. If Ling Xiaozui didn't catch any, then perhaps this 1,000-feet lake really doesn't have such fish? Han Sanha said. The youth in black lowered his head in silence. Let's go back. Han Sanha sighed. After all, this Chilean fish is a heavenly treasure. If it could be obtained so easily, I'm afraid it wouldn't be that precious. Han Sanha comforted him. With your peerless potential of 9 innately awakened chakras, you will definitely be an exceptional figure in the Tianshan continent in the future. Perhaps not taking this shortcut is your good fortune instead. The young man in black sighed and stood up unhappily. This is the only thing we can do now. The two of them didn't even pack up their fishing rods and just left them there. Since they couldn't catch any Kirin fish, what was the point of keeping these fishing rods? He stood up and sighed as he slowly walked back. I've already reported to the school about Baishua. The youth in black said, my master has already sent someone out to look for this Baishua. We have to demand an explanation from him. Gugu Baishua is no ordinary person. What about the people your master has sent? Could it be? Han Sanha reminded him, you must ensure that everything is safe. Don't let your guard down. The youth dressed in black, Gugu, said, this time my master has sent eldest senior brother. Eldest senior brother had fought with Baishua back in the day, so he knows him well. I believe there won't be any accidents. Don't worry, Marshal. The black-clothed youth paused for a moment before saying, Marshal, I'm actually surprised by another matter. Han Sanha was stunned. What is it? The youth in black thought for a moment and said, actually, I have my doubts about old he Han Qing. Han Sanha was stunned again and said in surprise, what does Gugu think? Just come. The youth in black said, Marshal, do you still remember the situation when you first met Baishua? Han Sanha was an enlightened man as well. With a quick thought, he could vaguely guess what the youth in black was referring to. Are you saying that He Hanqing's words are not entirely true? Not entirely true, I have my doubts. Marshal, please think about it. The 8 guards that you've assigned to you are all top-notch. Although they aren't among the world's top experts, 4 of them can fight against the world's pinnacle when they join forces. Even if they can't win in the end, they can still put up a fight for a while. However, Bai Yishue doesn't care about the 4 of them joining forces. Perhaps Bai Yishue can easily break through their teamwork. This is also the main reason why none of us refuted when Bai Yishue dared to say that he could kill you, Marshal. Marshal, your defensive formation can be said to be top-notch no matter which country it is in. But how could he escape Bai Yishue's ambush? Based on the righteous man he spoke of? The youth in black said in a low voice. Han Sanha thought about it for a moment and said slowly, He Hanqing has a reputation and is highly respected in Yutong. Perhaps he really has some expert helping him. The youth in black said, if that's the case, then he is even more remarkable. To be able to assemble a formation to fight against Bai Yishue, the capability he possesses is already terrifying. He said that he's targeting us. Our return journey is going to be a tough one. Han Sanha nodded. I understand what you mean. Tiantang City is indeed not a good place to stay. Since we didn't get the Kirin fish this time, let's go back as soon as possible. The youth in black replied, yes. Turning to look at the calm surface of the 1,000-feet lake, a sliver of indignation flitted across his eyes. Early in the morning the next day, Han Sanha sent someone to deliver a letter from him to old Marshal Qiu's residence, informing him of his departure. Qiu Jinhan finally heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the letter. The plague had finally left. When he wanted to send the letter off, he was told that Han Sanha and his entourage had already left the city gates and were at least dozens of miles away from the city. It's life or death if we meet again, Qiu Jinhan sighed and raised his goblet, toasting from afar. Han Sanha, have a safe journey. Just as Yunyang woke up, he saw Lao Mei and Fang Mafei standing outside the door with grim expressions. What is it? Yunyang asked as he wiped his face with a towel. Something big has happened. Bai Yishue is here. Fang Mafei said. Yunyang nodded faintly. I'll go take a look. When he saw Bai Yishue, Yunyang could not help but be shocked. Bai Yishue had come, but he no longer looked like a human. Although he was still standing, he looked extremely disheveled. Only his eyes were glaring at Yunyang. His white robe that was initially spotless was now ragged, hanging on his body in strips. Blood stains covered him from head to toe. There was a bloody hole on his shoulder and dozens of bloody holes on both sides of his thighs. Had it been someone else, he would have died long ago with such severe injuries. What is going on? Yunyang asked in shock. Brother Bai, how could this be? It would have been better if Yunyang had not spoken. Once he did, Bai Yishue's eyes reddened. What is going on? Don't you know what is going on? Yunyang grinned. I really don't know. Bai Yishue's eyes were almost spitting fire. Don't King play dumb with me. Tell me clearly, what kind of person is that He Hanqing? Yunyang said in surprise, the Grandmaster of Yutong's literati, the leader of a generation of scholars. Before he could finish, Bai Yishue had already interrupted him in exasperation. What T literati, what leader of scholars? King set someone up. Bai Yishue growled in an unusually low voice, even when I was fighting the concourse of the underworld, I wasn't as disheveled as I am now. Bai Yishue was truly aggrieved. He had never seen someone set him up like this. After leaving the residence of Bai Yishue realized that he had become everyone's target. No matter where he ran to, there would be assassins waiting for him. No matter who he met, they would attack him. He had been ambushed more than 120 times. How long had it been? What was worse was that there were more than a dozen of those who had fought with him, whose cultivation base was similar to the 8 people in the residence. There was even one whose cultivation base was obviously a notch higher than his, who was searching for him. If it were not for Bai Yishue's vigilance, he would have long been dead. Now, however, he had turned from an idler to a street rat, a target that everyone wanted to beat up. Even when he had been hunted by First Court King Qingguang, it had not been as dangerous as it was now. First Court King Qingguang was alone after all. Even when he was being hunted, there would always be time for him to catch his breath. This time, however, it was like a dragnet that was endless, coming one after the other. When he killed a 5th peak, a 7th peak appeared. When he killed a 7th peak, a 9th peak appeared. When he injured and chased the 9th peak away, a few perfected ones appeared. Then more powerful ones popped up one after another. It seemed that as long as he could continue fighting, the other party would continue to send out stronger and more powerful ones until he was killed. Bai Yixue could no longer hold himself back from the current situation. After the latest intense battle, he had activated the Blood Soul escape, exhausting his potential to unleash his extreme speed to find Yun Yang, who knew that a person's fart could hit his heel when he was down on his luck. On his way back, he had actually met First Court King Qingguang, who had disappeared for more than 10 days. After a bout of fighting, he had been severely injured and was on the brink of death. Finally, he had managed to escape with his life. He struggled his way to Yun Yang. I have to get to the bottom of this today. The more Bai Yixue thought about it, the more he felt wronged. He said in grief and indignation, "What kind of tiger's den have you made me barge into? There was no way to play with people like this." Chapter 212. How could Yun Yang admit to the crux of the matter? Yun Yang frowned and said, "Dragon's lair and tiger's den? How could it be? He Hanqing is the mastermind of the previous family of general's case. His crime is so heinous that everyone has the right to punish him. I've spared no effort to obtain this secret. This person's reputation among the scholars is too high. As long as he wants to cause trouble, he can do it with a mere thought. That's why I've come up with the idea of getting rid of him. It's only to get rid of the traitor for the nation, to get rid of the scourge for the people, to enforce justice for the world. There's no personal grudge. I've even used you because you're currently covered by your identity as Han Sanha's guard. It's enough to confuse the public, but there's no deeper intention. I've always thought that you would succeed easily with your ability and Han Sanha would be the scapegoat. However, from what you've said, this matter, has a huge change occurred?" Bai Yixue almost spat blood as he said in grief, "Don't you know the true capability of the person you're dealing with?" Yun Yang said seriously, "I only know that this person is extremely dangerous to Yu Tong and must be eliminated. Otherwise, why would I go through so much trouble to set up layers of schemes and set up a series of traps against him?" Bai Yixue was speechless. Yun Yang had already been so frank and told him the entire plan from the beginning to the end. What else could he say? What else could he say? Listening to him, it sounded like this young Master Yun was the true hero who served the nation and the people. But I've been tricked so badly, what can I say? Yun Yang sighed. Let's not talk about anything else first. Let's deal with your injuries first. Bai Yixue chuckled bitterly. Are you sure this place can protect me? Yun Yang sighed. So what if it can or not? You know that you shouldn't have come to me. Coming here is equivalent to exposing yourself and putting me in front of everyone, yet you've still come. It's obvious that you're at your wit's end, but you're not willing to die just like that. Don't worry, I won't be unjust even if you're heartless. No matter who you've provoked or whether it's really related to what I asked you to do, since you're already here, I definitely won't send you away for no reason. The current situation is that you've failed to do what you owe me. At the very least, you haven't finished what you owe me. Naturally, our agreement hasn't been fulfilled. I won't let you die just like that. Bai Yixue almost fainted. You obviously don't believe me? I'm not. Oh my God, you want me to kill them? He wanted to refute her, but before he could open his mouth, his eyes rolled back and he fainted. He was already severely injured, so it was not easy for him to hold on until now. Now that he was overwhelmed with anger, he could no longer hold on and fainted. Of course, he was also trying to escape from reality, seizing the opportunity to force Yun Yang. It would be best if he could cancel the mission. Yun Yang did not expect this fellow to be so temperamental. He could not help chuckling and said, "Let this Lord Bai stay in our house first. If King Qingguang finds this place during this period of time, let him look for me directly. I have my reasons." Looking at Bai Yixue's fainted face, Yun Yang wore a meaningful smile. This fellow actually wants to act shamelessly in front of me? All the foreign generals had left, including Han Sanha and the others who were the last to leave. Dressed in purple, Yun Yang sat under the flowering tree, deep thought flashing across his face. Based on the current situation, Bai Yixue's assassination could only be considered half completed. Yun Yang had never hoped that Bai Yixue could actually kill He Hanqing. With He Hanqing's foundation, Bai Yixue would not be able to defeat him no matter how strong he was. This was something that was difficult to resolve. Yun Yang's real goal was to incite the conflict between the Four Seasons Tower and Han Sanha. That was all. If these two groups of people were to go against each other, that would be the scene that Yun Yang would be most happy to see. As the operation of the continent's foreign generals in Tiantang City came to an end, Yun Yang naturally shifted his focus back to Supreme Lord Spring Frost. The only thing on his mind right now was to kill He Hanqing. As for Bai Yishue himself, Yunyang did not have any specific thoughts. No matter what Bai Yishue did in the process, Yunyang did not want to be bothered about it. However, the situation now was very different from what he had planned. The original plan was for Bai Yishue to carry out the assassination after Han Sanhe had left. No matter what happened to Bai Yishue in the assassination, whether he escaped or died in the battle, Han Sanhe had already left, so he would be the one to take the blame for everything. By then, He Hanqing's rage would be much more intense than it was now because he would have lost the first target to vent his anger. Now, however, Han Sanhe had not left and Bai Yishue had made his move. The two parties involved had even met face to face. Even if the explanation did not work, the outcome was still not optimistic. Both of them were shrewd people. It was hard to guarantee that the misunderstanding would not be resolved. Going back on his word and not being reliable, what a bad thing. Yunyang sighed. Bai Yishue had come looking for him at this juncture. He knew that he would definitely die if he continued to wander about outside now that he was gravely injured. Therefore he had come here on the pretense of denouncing Yunyang and asking for the reason, but in reality he wanted to come here to avoid trouble and recuperate. In Yunyang's eyes, Bai Yishue's little thoughts were as clear as a blazing fire. He could see them clearly. However, the residence of Heavenly Clouds was truly the only place that could allow Bai Yishue to escape death today and hide from his past enemies throughout the entire Jade Emperor city. Not only would He Hanqing's force not come, even if First Court King Qingguang were to come, there would still be room for negotiation. This was Bai Yishue's additional fortune, a fortune that no one else knew about other than Yunyang. However, since you're here and I have a handle on you, it won't be so easy when you want to leave. Yunyang chuckled unscrupulously. He was already calculating whether there was a possibility of completely subduing the world's sixth swordsman. Perhaps after the tour guide, the generals of various nations, and the incident with the family of generals, a certain person's blackness had increased to a whole new level. Now he was as black as ink, so black that he could not be any darker. It was especially convincing when he spoke irrationally and made irresponsible statements. Young master, about that? Fang Mafei hesitated. What is it? Yunyang asked. About that? YD2, YD3, YD4? Fang Mafei was rather anxious. I haven't seen them for a few days. Did something happen to them? The true identities of the YD were surpassing mystical beasts. Fang Mafei knew this better than anyone else, so he was naturally very concerned about them. Yunyang smiled. It's fine, it's fine. They just went out to play. It's really fine. They'll be back when they're done. Play? Done? Fang Mafei was dumbfounded. Did they go out to play or work? How could playing be compared to working? Did young master know what he was talking about? If you have the time to think about the whereabouts of the YD, why don't you think about yourselves? How has your cultivation base been recently? Yunyang changed the topic. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei were speechless, not knowing how to answer. What do you mean by recently? You've only asked about our cultivation base 10 days ago, haven't you? Do you think that there will be an obvious improvement in 10 days or even a level higher? Send a message to spring, summer, autumn and winter later. Ask them to come over, Yunyang ordered. Yes. On the other side, the empire of Ziyou's generals were advancing swiftly. They were now close to the border between Yutang and Ziyou. Their journey had been smooth, so the people who had been feeling uneasy all heaved a collective sigh of relief and relaxed. After going over the mountain in front and passing through the dense forest, we'll be in Ziyou's territory. Even if Yutang has set up something, it'll be hard for them to do anything about it. Marshal Zi Yuanlong pointed forward with his whip. Finally, we're back. The generals looked at the long line of horses behind them and the blood of the hero that had been transported back. They were excited. This military wine has not let down our brother's expectations. Have you managed to contact the spies you've planted in Yutang? Zi Yuanlong's white beard fluttered as he asked in a low voice. We've only managed to contact a portion of them. Many of them haven't responded. Although our stay this time was much shorter than planned, there's still room for improvement. Those who haven't been contacted have most likely been taken out by the Empire of Yutang, said a general. It's not a surprise. As long as there are still people lying in ambush, our plan is considered a success. Zi Yuanlong sighed. Remember to compensate the families of those who have been sacrificed. Yes. A general chuckled and said, however, the Empire of Yutang is just as Marshal had predicted. Our ambush was completely useless. They actually let us in and allowed us to return safely. There was no chance of an ambush. Zi Yuanlong said, Yutong values martial arts, its heroic spirit far surpassing the other nations. They disdain to target the enemy nation's generals under such circumstances. This must be Yutong's insistence. The old marshal's face was tinged with sorrow. That's right. I respect Yutong for doing this, but I can't help but sigh at their stubbornness. Another general said, what a great opportunity this is. If we had taken the chance to strike, there would have been a great chance to deal a heavy blow to the military higher-ups of the other nations at the same time. Zi Yuanlong said faintly, Xiao Yuji, are you disappointed that they didn't attack you and didn't kill you? General Xiao Yuji opened his mouth and laughed awkwardly. Marshal, you must be joking. I was just feeling sentimental for a moment. I'm worrying for nothing, ha. The surrounding generals guffawed upon hearing his self-deprecation. Amidst the laughter, the group had already entered the dense forest. This was the empire of Zio's territory, so everyone seemed more relaxed. However, they had only walked for a short while when the sound of wind breaking could be heard amidst the laughter. A white silhouette appeared from the forest like a bolt of lightning, heading straight for Zi Yuanlong. Everything happened so abruptly, and the changes happened right in front of their eyes. Zi Yuanlong had not even realized that something had happened. He was still twisting his body and laughing with the others. The guard in front of him had already noticed the anomaly and cried out as a warning. Be careful. At the same time, the guard leaped up and stood in front of Zi Yuanlong's steed without a care for his life. Poof! The guard's head was immediately smashed into mush. Chapter 213. The guard's cultivation base should not have been so weak, but he was caught off guard and could not even muster his mystical chi in time before he was killed. The white shadow did not stop in the air. It opened its mouth wide and a ball of light shot out. Swoosh! Marshal, be careful. Another two generals leaped forward without hesitation, using all their strength to throw Zi Yuanlong off his horse. With a loud bang, two large holes appeared on the backs of the two generals. Zi Yuanlong, who was under them, let out a muffled groan. The white shadow left a series of afterimages in the air. It came and went like the wind, advancing and retreating like lightning. It attacked the troops like lightning, and as it clawed and scratched, 3 more balls of light shot out. More than 10 generals were killed by this attack and their heads exploded. Their deaths were so horrible that it was unbearable to look at them. Stop it. Green mystical chi rose rapidly around another of Zi Yuanlong's guards. After the initial panic, he had only reacted now and said, it's a 9th-level mystical beast, the Eclipse Panther. Everyone be careful. A few guards leaped up at the same time, sword and saber light dancing back and forth, intending to restrict the Eclipse Panther's movement and incredible speed. A group of Zio generals had also channeled their cultivation base, glaring at the Eclipse Panther that was scurrying around in the air, leaving afterimages in its wake. Hundreds of people attacked together. The empire of Zio's experts had finally caught up from the back. With a long howl, they leaped into the air and swooped down. With a shrill cry, the Eclipse Panther somersaulted in the air and retreated to the treetop of a big tree 500 feet away like a flash of lightning. Obviously, the large-scale, indiscriminate attack was too concentrated. No matter how fast the Eclipse Panther was, it was still caught. Seeing that their attack had succeeded, the group was ready to strike again, to kill the despicable 9th-level mystical beast with all their might and avenge their fallen brothers. The Zio expert who was leading the group leaped into the air, turning into a shadow as he flew towards the treetop. However, the white shadow flashed and was already 1,000 feet away in the blink of an eye, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Meow? The Eclipse Panther was like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. It fled far away, rolling towards the dense forest. A dignified 9th-grade Shen beast actually ran away just like that. When he came, he didn't even say a word before taking action. When he left, he didn't even give any warning. He came and went as he pleased. Only corpses were left on the ground. What's going on? Why was he ambushed? Zi Yuanlong struggled to stand up. His back was a mess of flesh and blood, and even a large patch of white hair was gone. Even though the guards risked their lives to stop the Eclipse Panther and 2 generals risked their lives to save him, the aftermath of the Eclipse Panther's attack still affected him. Although he was not seriously injured, he was still injured. Right now, Zi Yuanlong's eyes were filled with rage. It was not for himself, but for the dozens of comrades who had died in the blink of an eye. It's an Eclipse Panther. A 9th-level mystical beast, Eclipse Panther. The guards surrounded him tightly, and all the experts from the rear also gathered in his direction. It was obvious that they were afraid that the Eclipse Panther would turn around and attack again. Everything that had happened just now had been too sudden, too abrupt. It had only been a matter of time before the ambush ended. After the wave of attack, the Eclipse Panther had already disappeared. Why would there be an Eclipse Panther here? How could there be one? Zhi Yuanlong looked at the quiet forest, his heart burning with rage. Then he looked at the dozen generals and guards who had died miserably on the ground. He felt a sharp pain in his heart that was difficult to suppress. Usually, there wouldn't even be third or fourth level mystical beasts in this place. Why would a top-notch mystical beast, the overlord of the forest, suddenly appear and launch a deadly ambush on us? Zhi Yuanlong was furious. Search. Zio's army quickly divided into 10 small teams and began a thorough search into the depths of the forest. Just as the operation began, suddenly a blood-curdling scream rang out. The bearded general who was in charge of leading the team suddenly froze, his eyes bulging in terror. His hands opened wide and a mouthful of blood spurted from his mouth. The color of the blood was green. As the blood gushed out, the general's body swayed and he collapsed on his back. What's happening now? Zhi Yuanlong roared. What's going on? The other generals rushed forward, thinking that the general had been attacked by the Eclipse Panther again, but upon closer inspection, they realized that it was not the case. Everyone was speechless. General Bu seems to have been poisoned. The bearded general on the ground was green all over, his breathing weak. He lay on the ground, only his eyes blinking weakly and in a daze. The rest of his body was unresponsive. How could he have been poisoned? When did he get poisoned? Since when was the Eclipse Panther poisoned? Zhi Yuanlong looked at the bearded man, extremely anxious. What poison is he suffering from? Quick, save him. The accompanying pharmacist rushed forward to check on him. It was a pity that before the doctor could give any specific results, another 3 people suddenly let out a blood-curdling shriek and fell to the ground one after another. These 3 people were also green all over, green blood splattering from their bodies. When the blood landed on the ground, it glowed an eerie green. The 3 of them were in the same condition as the bearded General Bu. All of them had been poisoned. The situation was dire. So many things had happened one after another without any warning. Everyone's mind was in a state of disarray. What had gone wrong? When were they poisoned? Also, were they the only ones who were poisoned, or were there more people who were poisoned as well? What poison is it? Zhi Yuanlong pushed a general aside and approached the pharmacist to ask, "Have you found out?" The general he had pushed away turned his head unintentionally and suddenly cried out, "Marshal, you," Zhi Yuanlong said angrily, "what are you screaming for? Why are you shouting in such a critical moment?" Before he could finish his sentence, Zhi Yuanlong's eyes revealed a strange expression. His body swayed violently and he felt dizzy. When he looked down, he saw that his hands and wrists had turned green. "Marshal." A few generals cried out in alarm and rushed forward to support Zhi Yuanlong. However, even Zhi Yuanlong's face had turned green. His body swayed and after a few breaths, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of green blood and collapsed on his back. Seeing that their own marshal had also suffered the same fate, the situation became even more chaotic. "Quickly, return to the country." Zhi Yuanlong struggled to hold on, stammering. However, everyone saw that his eyes were already filled with a deathly gray color. The group could no longer be bothered to search for the Eclipse Panther. They only left behind a small group of men to escort the wine and advance slowly. As for the doctors and generals who accompanied the army, they immediately left the main group to protect the 5 poisoned people, including Zhi Yuanlong, as they sprinted forward. The doctors hurriedly treated the poisoned people as they galloped. They did not seek to treat the poison immediately but tried their best to delay the poison from attacking the hearts of the poisoned people. Everyone was on tenterhooks. Everyone was fearful, wondering if anyone else was poisoned. Who knew if someone else would fall from the horse as they galloped? Fortunately, no one else was poisoned even after they galloped for a long time. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Basically, they could confirm that only these 5 people were poisoned. Although it was fortunate that only 5 people were poisoned, the fact that Marshal Zhi Yuanlong was one of them was a cause for concern. The doctors tried their best to save him. Zhi Yuanlong, who had consumed 7 to 8 types of pills, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Although his face was still pale, his breathing was much smoother. His eyes were filled with anger as he watched the doctors treat him and waited quietly. After a while, one of the doctors stopped what he was doing and looked at the other doctors with an ugly expression. The few of them looked at each other and nodded solemnly. "Marshal, we can confirm the poison you've been poisoned," one of the doctors said in a low voice. "What poison is it?" Zhi Yuanlong took a deep breath, his suppressed anger almost bursting out. It's the soul-sealing needle, the doctor gulped. The school of spring and autumn's exclusive hidden weapon. Although the poison is slightly weaker, it is indeed the poison of the soul-sealing needle. There's no doubt about it. Soul-sealing needle? Zi Yuanlong, who was initially furious, suddenly froze. Even those two eyeballs suddenly froze in that instant. When the generals heard the news, they rushed to the side of the carriage. How is the marshal? Is he all right? The poison of the soul-sealing needle shouldn't have acted up so early. However, the sudden appearance of the eclipse panther and the forceful circulation of mystical qi has hastened the poison's outbreak. The doctor's expression was grim. This eclipse panther, although it killed a few people, its true purpose seems to be to trigger the poison. Zi Yuanlong's expression was unusually grim as he slowly spat out a few words. Han Sanha? Why is this so? After saying this, Zi Yuanlong stared blankly at the empty space before him, as if all the energy in his body had been sucked away. His head tilted and he fainted, never to return to consciousness. Marshal. Han Sanha? What Han Sanha? Is this related to Han Sanha? What poison is it? Why is it so strange? All the generals asked at once. One of the doctors looked grim. The poison the five of them were inflicted with is the poison of the soul-sealing needle. Marshal fainted when he heard the words soul-sealing needle. Soul-sealing needle? The empire of Zio's assistant Marshal Wang Yutang's gaze froze. The school of spring and autumn's exclusive hidden weapon, the soul-sealing needle? Are you sure? This is a serious matter, don't speak carelessly. The doctors spoke in unison. We dare not speak carelessly. The poison the marshal and the others were inflicted with is indeed the poison of the soul-sealing needle. We can guarantee it with our lives. There's no mistake. Chapter 214. Wang Yutang sucked in a deep breath, his expression turning unprecedentedly pale. The expressions of the other high-ranking generals also became extremely solemn, and extreme anger rose in their hearts. One of the generals said angrily, if this lowly general remembers correctly, the sinister kid in black who has been following Han Sanha around seems to be from the school of spring and autumn. Another general was huffing and puffing as he said angrily, that's right. I remember when someone went to gamble that day and we were chatting with our bosses, we heard Han Sanha mention this. He looked so proud then. How did the school of spring and autumn soul-sealing spike end up with us? Wang Yutang frowned. Isn't that obvious? A general said angrily, it must be Han Sanha who has ulterior motives and has done this to us. This is how the so-called god of war came to be, despicable and shameless. Let's return home first. This lowly general shall report this to His Majesty and send troops to Dongshen to seek justice. Yes, we must capture that despicable Han Sanha and avenge the marshal. The generals cheered, all of them raging with rage. If the Empire of Yutang had been behind this incident, they would not have been this furious, even if they were angry. After all, both sides were enemies and were destined to be irreconcilable enemies. There was always a reason for using despicable tactics against the enemy, whether it was despicable or shameless. However, if the culprit was Han Sanha who was their ally, the nature of the incident was entirely different. This was akin to not dying in the hands of the enemy on the battlefield but dying from an arrow shot from the back by one's own people. Being schemed against by one's own comrade was the most painful taboo of a soldier on the battlefield. This outcome infuriated all the generals and generals. Wang Yutang said loudly, don't act rashly for now. What's more urgent now isn't what we should do to Han Sanha. Our priority now is to protect the marshal and our brothers' lives. Everything else can wait until we return to the capital city. If you have connections, quickly think of a way to get the antidote for the soul-sealing spike. Everyone check yourselves carefully as well. With Han Sanha's cunning, this might not be his only plan. There might be more to it. Wang Yutang's white beard fluttered in the wind. At least for now, no one is allowed to act rashly. Even if we really want to take revenge, acting rashly will only increase our own casualties. It's futile to mess up our own formation. Since Han Sanha dared to do something like this, he must have planned it in advance. If we act rashly, we'll only fall into a deeper trap. Instead of moving now, it's better to stay put. Perfect planning is the right way to retaliate. Everyone here has been through hundreds of battles and understands this. I believe I don't need to say anything more. Wang Yutang's white beard fluttered. Let's go back first. Hurry back to the capital as fast as you can and treat the poison people. Yes? The people from the Empire of Zio sprinted back at top speed. Wang Yutang bit his finger and wrote something in blood on a piece of white silk on the bumpy carriage that looked like it could fall apart at any time. Your Majesty, Marshal Z's poison. The group sprinted like a meteor chasing the moon, traveling day and night. What they did not know was that the 4 physicians were baffled. They had heard that there was no antidote for the soul-sealing spike. Death was certain for those who were poisoned. The poison would erupt within 10 days. Even if it did not attack the heart, it would burn the meridians and corrode the bones, destroying the blood and tendons. Although the marshal and the others were stiff and their flesh was grayish-green, their internal organs were corroded by the poison and they were in a critical condition. There were no signs of imminent death. They could at least stay alive for 10 days to half a month. Could it be that this soul-locking needle only had an undeserved reputation? There was also the Eclipse Panther's cry before it left. Meow. The 4 physicians were not far away then, so they heard it loud and clear. It was the Eclipse Panther. But meow? What did it mean? It was not only the 4 physicians, there was also the Empire of Zio's leading expert, a perfected Grandmaster expert. It was a must for him to have sharp ears and eyes. He had also heard that cry, but he felt that it was inconceivable. He almost thought that he had heard it wrong. How could the Eclipse Panther meow? This was a little strange. At the same time, the Empire of Deyuan's returning troops had also reached a forest. 3 people had succumbed to the poison and had fallen to the ground. After a moment of panic, the group found out what had happened. The soul-sealing spike. The old marshal of Deyuan's expression was grim. Han Sanha. Everyone saw that you brought the school of spring and autumn with you. Why did you do this to the alliance? Why did you leave no room for maneuver? Could it be that advocating for the empires to join forces against Yutong was also part of his plan? Yes. Deyuan has suffered the most in this trip to Yutong. Even Sir Liang has perished in the residence of 9 supremes, but Dongxin has suffered the least among all the empires. Everyone has left at the same time, only Han Sanha has stayed. If it wasn't for this scheme, how could this have happened? The generals were also indescribably sorrowful and indignant, their hearts filled with rage. Just as everyone was in a frenzy trying to save the poisoned, an Eclipse Panther emerged from the forest and charged into the crowd. It was a massacre. When the guards and experts fought back, the Eclipse Panther's calf-sized body had already drifted to the top of the tree and left like a bolt of lightning, traveling thousands of miles away in the dense forest. Looking at the mess and the dozen men killed by the Eclipse Panther, the Empire of Deyuan's generals could only feel the pain in their hearts, yet they had no tears left to cry. Who would have thought that a 9th-level mystical beast would jump out and attack a place that had been recognized as safe for generations, just as they were about to return home? Go back. Ask for the antidote from Han Sanha immediately. If he doesn't give it to us, we'd rather start a war. Ask him to kowtow and apologize, or we won't let this go. The Empire of Tianxi could not avoid the disaster as well. The situation was basically the same as Deyuan and Zio. 3 people had been poisoned by the soul-sealing spike as well. Similarly, an Eclipse Panther had appeared and attacked. In spite of this, Tianxi's casualties were the lightest among the 3 empires. It was probably because the Empire of Tianxi's reinforcement troop had been waiting here since a long time ago. Although the Eclipse Panther was a 9th-level mystical beast, it was no match for the army. It had only harassed them slightly before leaving. In spite of this, the Empire of Tianxi's army's rage was like a prairie fire that could not be suppressed. Han Sanha. Despicable scum, how dare he poison them? It was the same for the 3 empires. Something like this happening in front of everyone's eyes could not be covered up. Rumors about Han Sanha's conspiracy spread like wildfire. The military was enraged. Although the 3 empires had suffered heavy casualties, most of them had returned safely. In spite of this, the journey back to Dongxin for Han Sanha and the rest was a turbulent one. Dongxin had sent a total of 5,000 men to Yutong this time. When Zhang Gu and the rest left, they had only taken 1,000 men with them to ensure Han Sanha's safety. Han Sanha led the remaining 4,000 men and the expert guards hidden among the troops. Their capabilities were formidable. If it were not for the official army's interception, ordinary forces would not have been able to stop them. However, ever since Han Sanha's troop had left Tiantang City, they had been traveling day and night, but they had been met with continuous harassment and ambushes since the second night. What was worse was that Han Sanha had swiftly come to the conclusion that this level of harassment and ambushes was definitely not the work of Yutong's officials. Because the attackers were all people of the pugilistic world. Assassins of all kinds, gangs, forces, groups. Sometimes, there was only one person who would charge in and kill for a while before leaving. Sometimes they would charge into the army in groups of 3 to 5, charging in and out of the front and back to kill. What was even more outrageous was that there were bandits who had set up roadblocks along the path they had to pass, specifically to stop Han Sanhe's army. The journey back was truly a bloodbath for every inch of land and river. An inch of blood was no more than an inch of land and river. Before the 4,000 men had even traveled halfway, they had already lost more than 3,300 men. There were less than 700 men left from the original 4,000 men. The casualties sent chills down Han Sanhe's spine even though he was a veteran of the battlefield. He vaguely knew that the assassination along the way could not have been arranged by anyone else. It was definitely the old scholar, He Han-ching, who was in Yutong City. However, Han Sanhe could not figure out who the old scholar was, no matter how hard he racked his brains. How could he have such a high influence in the martial world? Other than the old man's own influence, he had even hired top-notch assassins to ambush them. Along the way, the Merciless Tower's men had appeared 3 times while the concourse of the Underworld's men had appeared a few times too. As for the local forces, they were experts among experts as well. The lethality and terror of these ambushers was not something an ordinary army could withstand. Of course, no matter how skilled these people were, they would never be a match for the strict military tactics. The problem was that Han Sanhe had too little manpower at hand. If I had 20,000 men and horses, I'm confident that I can bury all the experts and assassins along the way, no matter what kind of experts and assassins they are. It's a pity. Han Sanhe heaved a long sigh. What he said was true. A martial artist against a soldier could be said to be a sure win. However, 1,000 martial artists against 1,000 soldiers would basically lose. Even if their cultivation base was much higher than the soldiers, there was no exception. Even if it was a 10th perfection grandmaster, if he were to fall into the encirclement of thousands of elite soldiers, with a marshal like Han Sanhe directing them, the grandmaster would only be left with a dead end in the military formation. Along the way, however, none of the ambushers had fought Han Sanhe's army head-on. They would leave immediately after killing a few of them, never lingering on the battle nor delving deeper. Along the way it was like a pack of wolves fighting a lion. They would take a bite and gain an advantage, then they would leave. Then there would be a new pack of wolves coming up to bite the lion. Faced with such a situation, even if Han Sanhe was exceedingly capable, he could only sigh helplessly. A pack of wolves fighting a lion. No matter how ferocious the lion was, it would eventually be exhausted. Once it was exhausted, it would be buried in the wolves' mouths. Who is this He Han-ching? How can his forces be so vast? Han Sanhe's face was already ashen. Also, who ordered Bai Yixue to do this? There's a mastermind behind all of this. Chapter 215. Yet there were no signs at all. This old man prides himself on being resourceful, always planning before making a move. This time, I don't even know who my opponent is and I'm already in such a predicament. Han Sanhe felt like he was traversing through a thick fog, not knowing who was in front of him, but the most depressing thing was that he did not know who was behind him. From front to back, there was nothing but a cloud of fog. As for He Han-ching, he had severely underestimated him. He had thought that he was just a scholar, but looking at the situation now, he was obviously an extremely troublesome character. Had he offended the head of the martial world? Wave after wave, it was practically endless. Even the lowest cultivation base among them was at the 5th level. The team of 4,000 people was continuously attacked. They killed wave after wave of enemies, but their side was also constantly losing members. Moreover, the number of members they were losing was getting greater and greater. The youth in black looked grim as he said, "Marshal, I've already sent out a distress signal the day before yesterday. I believe our reinforcements will be here soon, but this is really strange, especially this He Han-ching's identity. It's of utmost importance. We must find out who this person is." The youth in black's voice was deep. There aren't many people who can do this in the martial world. We must know who our opponent is so we can deal with him accordingly. Han Sanhe said, "Tell me about the forces in the martial world that can do this. I'll look into it." The youth in black chuckled bitterly. "Marshal, the Tianshan continent is vast, filled with talented people. There are actually quite a number of strong and powerful sects with deep foundations. Although these sects don't usually show themselves and are rare, there are still more than a dozen of them. The strength that these sects possess has already exceeded the limit that a country can fight against, so it's meaningless to list them out one by one. As for existences like He Han-ching who can mobilize so many people to kill, although there aren't many of them, there are still quite a number of people or forces who have this kind of strength. There are at least 40 to 50 of them. In fact, it might even be more than that. Han Sanha was surprised. There are actually so many hidden forces in this world? How come I didn't know? The black-clothed youth shook his head and said, Marshall is a soldier after all. You spend most of your time with the army. Of course, you don't know much about these things that are beyond the capabilities of ordinary people. Besides, these forces rarely get involved in the disputes between mortal empires, and they rarely confront the people in the army. It's difficult for them to overlap, so... The muscles on Han Sanha's face twitched as he said, if the Empire of Yutong's court has always had such a terrifying presence, why? This was also the fundamental reason why he had looked down on He Hanqing before. He Hanqing's performance was terrifying enough. Having an expert guard team that could survive a head-on attack from Bai Yixue, who was at the pinnacle of swordsmanship, was enough to prove that he was not a nobody. However, Dongshen and Yutong had been fighting for so many years. Since He Hanqing possessed such terrifying power, why had he never used it? Even when Yutong was on the brink of destruction, He Hanqing did not show himself. Other than being a great scholar, he was also a veteran of 3 dynasties. There were too many times when he should have contributed, but he did not. Not moving usually meant that he could not move, or that he did not have the ability to move. It was because of this reason that Han Sanha had overthought things. But now that he thought about it carefully, it was extremely frightening. No one would have thought that the main reason why this senior statesman of 3 dynasties, a master of the literary world, and a publicly acknowledged loyal official did not appear was because he did not really provoke him and his life was not in danger. Now that Han Sanha had provoked him, sure enough, He Hanqing's true side was surging towards He Hanqing in such a terrifying and flamboyant manner. Now that he thought about it, it was no longer just horrifying, but extremely horrifying. I can't look down on others. I can't believe that I, Han Sanha, would have such a miscalculation one day. Han Sanha sighed in melancholy. It was only now that Han Sanha finally thought of something. If He Hanqing was only an insignificant person without any special background, why would the mastermind go through so much trouble to set him up to go against He Hanqing? Layers upon layers of schemes, even sending Bai Yixue the world's 6th swordsman. While the target of this scheme was Han Sanha, he was only the second in line because He Hanqing was the person whom the mastermind truly valued. It was evident that the mastermind was not an ordinary person. He must be an extremely formidable character. Han Sanha could only blame himself for realizing it too late. If he had seen through this earlier and told He Hanqing everything earlier, the situation would not have ended up like this. Could he blame He Hanqing for hiding it so well? Did he not care about it at first? He could only blame himself for being too careless. Marshall doesn't have to worry too much. Gugu, the youth dressed in black, comforted him. I don't think He Hanqing's actions are to take Marshall's life. It's more like he's testing the waters, trying to force out the 3rd force. However, he doesn't know that we're only a pawn of the 3rd force. Therefore, while the journey will be fraught with danger, our lives might not be in danger. Han Sanha's brows were knitted together, his gaze deep. He doesn't want to take my life, but he's trying his best to reduce my men. I'm guessing He Hanqing wants to kill until there's no one left on Marshall's side. Only then will Marshall return to Dongshen. Only then will the ambush end. Gugu sighed. Han Sanha immediately understood why Gugu had sighed. If he wanted to kill until he was the only one left, did that not mean that Gugu would lose his life as well? Right at this moment, a sharp howl suddenly sounded out. Obviously, another wave of assassinations had arrived. Fight! Han Sanha hollered. Although there were not many of them left, 700 men were still a force to be reckoned with in the hands of an unparalleled marshal. When they were about 1,000 miles away from Dongxuan's capital, there were less than 100 soldiers by Han Sanha's side. Moreover, all of them were wounded. Their bodies were full of scars and blood. Everyone's nerves were on the verge of collapse. This was truly a journey of death. Fortunately, the reinforcement that the youth in black had been waiting for had finally arrived. To bring a glimmer of hope to this battered troop. In the sky, a giant eagle that was 100 feet wide when it spread its wings circled in the air before slowly descending. Eldest senior brother is here. Gugu, the youth in black, cried out, his voice shrill with excitement. As long as one was human, they would be afraid of death, especially if they were to die without knowing why. How could Gugu not be ecstatic when he saw the arrival of hope? A tall silhouette leaped down from the eagle's back in the sky. The newcomer's robe billowed in the wind, fluttering like a deity from the 9 heavens. Han Sanha heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. Gugu was exhilarated as well. Han Sanha and Gugu's joy was not without reason. After the arrival of this person, The attack that Han Qing had arranged had suddenly disappeared, as if there had never been any attack. Han Sanhe and his entourage had finally returned to the capital safely. However, Han Sanhe, who had just returned to the capital, fell into an even greater predicament. Messenger pigeons from the empires of Diyuan, Tianxi, and Ziyou had arrived one after another. The words were harsh, the hatred and the gnashing of teeth were obvious and undisguised. Hand over the antidote. Han Sanhe and Gugu were dumbfounded when they heard this, unable to comprehend the meaning behind it. The soul-sealing spike had been used on them? When did it happen? Gugu, you? I didn't. Gugu's face, which had always been tanned, was flushed red. Then what is going on? Han Sanhe paced back and forth, thinking for a long time before saying faintly, Gugu, are you sure that you've only attacked once in Tiantang City? Yes, I've only attacked once and with only one soul-sealing spike. I used it on Yunyang. Gugu said with certainty. Yunyang? Han Sanhe chuckled bitterly. It was as if the handsome youth who did not seem to belong to this world had appeared before his eyes once again. He was also the witty and resourceful Tiantang City tour guide who had resorted to every trick in the book. Han Sanhe's gaze met Gugu's. Both of them saw the glimmer of possibility in each other's eyes. If such a situation had really happened, then there's only one possibility, Gugu said hesitantly. Only that person would have the chance. Han Sanhe said, but why would he use one soul-sealing spike on so many people? Gugu said angrily, it must be that bastard who framed me. Framed you? Han Sanhe sighed. If you hadn't used the soul-sealing spike on him, I'm afraid he wouldn't have been able to frame you. Now, even if you knew it was him, you wouldn't be able to explain it to the other countries. There's no evidence. Do you think you've been framed just because you said so? The poison of the soul-sealing spike is rare in this world. There's no antidote at all. So many people have been poisoned by the soul-sealing spike but no one has died. This means that the poison of the soul-sealing spike has been diluted. How diluted? It's because he used the soul-sealing spike to deal with so many people at the same time. That's why such a situation has occurred. Gugu said fiercely, this Yunyang really doesn't have any good intentions. This way he stirred up a conflict between Dongxian and the other three empires' military. If I were given the chance, I'd tear him into pieces. Gugu was so angry that the disguise on his face almost fell off. This fellow is really tolerant. He knew that you were the one who attacked him but he didn't show it at all. Instead, he used your method on the other country's generals in the dark. Han Sanhe chuckled bitterly. Now that we've all returned to our respective countries, the three empires that are thousands of miles apart, there's no chance for us to sit down and bury the hatchet. This scheme is truly remarkable. It's not that there's no other way. Gugu gritted his teeth and turned to look at his eldest senior brother, begging, eldest senior brother, the eldest senior brother, who was dressed in a green robe and had 3 wisps of beard, smiled faintly. Although we don't have a specific antidote for the soul-sealing spike, we still have a way to suppress it. Besides, they're not deeply poisoned. It's not a problem for us in our sect. Since they've misunderstood and this matter involves our sect's secret weapon, we really have to make a trip. Gugu's eyes shone. Eldest senior brother is the best. The eldest senior brother smiled faintly. However, I can't let my Ying carry an ugly child. If it's a fragrant little beauty, I'm sure my Ying will be very happy. I'm going out with my wife when the sun rises. It's Valentine's Day after all. Although I really don't want to go out. I can't beat the thighs. It'll be later the next day, maybe 8 or 9 at night. I wish my brothers and sisters a happy Valentine's Day. Chapter 216. Gugu puffed her cheeks. Eldest senior brother only knows how to bully others. The eldest senior brother laughed, no longer joking. Gugu, come with me. Use my hawk. It'll be faster. As long as we go and Gugu comes personally, this misunderstanding can be cleared away. If that's the case, I'll leave everything to you. Han Sanhe sighed. Marshal Han did not know what to do. Too many things had happened recently. They were too unexpected, too outrageous, too unbelievable, and too inconceivable. However, Han Sanhe knew that the repercussions of this incident were too severe. If the 3 empires were to misunderstand because of this, the situation would escalate to an unsalvageable stage. The most urgent matter was to settle this matter thoroughly, to prevent anyone from dying as much as possible. Only then could they sort out the cause and effect of the incident. If someone really died, even if the cause and effect were to be clarified, the blame would still fall on him and the entire empire of Dongxian. There's no time to lose. Let's depart now. The eldest senior brother smiled. Just in case someone really dies over there, that would be bad. The eldest senior brother of the School of Spring and Autumn had obviously thought of the severity of the matter. If it were not so, with his status, he might not have made the long journey to rescue someone. When this is over, Gugu, come back and don't run around. Master will be looking for you during this period of time. I'll make a trip to Tiantang City along the way and meet this person who can make my little junior sister suffer. The eldest senior brother laughed, and with a wave of his sleeve, he had already soared into the air with Gugu's slender body. With a hawk's cry, the mystical hawk had already arrived beneath the both of them. With a long howl, the mystical hawk soared into the sky like a black arrow. Watching the huge hawk soar into the sky and turn into a tiny black dot above the clouds, Han Sanha's expression was solemn. Everything is a mess. From the looks of it, be it the assassination attempt on He Hanqing, the poisoning of the generals, the assassinations along the way, or everything in Tiantang City, it's all a cloud of mystery. There's no clue at all. However, there must be a mastermind behind all of this. He planned everything, manipulated everything, manipulated everything, manipulated everyone and all forces in the palm of his hand. This person is too terrifying. And now, the biggest question is, who is the mastermind behind this? How can he hide so well? It's simply perfect. Han Sanha thought about it for a long time before his expression darkened. Yin Yang? Could it be him? There's a 99% chance that Yin Yang is the culprit behind the poisoning of the generals. If he's the one behind the other incidents as well, then this person is terrifying. An unusually sharp glint shone in Han Sanha's eyes as he said in a low voice, Men. Here? Send a few capable men to Tiantang City. Also show us the martial arts world's bounty as well. Han Sanha sucked in a breath and said, Kill Yin Yang and see what happens next. Yes? Han Sanha's expression was grim. If there's any reaction after killing Yin Yang, then it must be Yin Yang's doing. If there's no reaction, then Yin Yang's dead. Since there aren't any better targets, let's test the waters first. I, Han Sanha, have never resorted to such tactics. I've actually made an exception for this child this time. Yin Yang did not let his guard down even though his plan to target the various empires was completed. He began to consolidate the various forces he had on hand. First, he searched through the Nine Heavens Dictum's manpower and arranged for Shui Wuyin to join the Nine Heavens Dictum's work. As for the Towering Wind Pavilion, since Shui Wuyin had gone underground, the Towering Wind Pavilion, which had no one guarding it, had gradually become useless and was sold off by Yin Yang. After this series of events, Yin Yang had an abundance of silver taels on hand. After paying off all his debts, he still had a balance of 210 million taels. This was an unprecedented amount of wealth. Yin Yang was also considering how he should spend this sum of money. After all, in young Master Yun's heart, there was only one concept of money. What was spent was money. What was the use of keeping it? Was it nice to look at? After the four noble young masters were summoned by Yin Yang that day, Yin Yang unexpectedly found out why these four fellows had not made a move during this period of time. It turned out that since these four fellows had received Yin Yang's promise, they had immediately contacted their families and made a scene, swearing to prove that it was true, ordering the four noble families to search for high-level mystical beasts outside. Up to now, the various clans had already made considerable progress in the matter of searching for high-level profound beasts. The spring, summer, and autumn families had indeed gotten their hands on 8th-level pinnacle mystical beast cubs and had already sent their men to deliver them over. Only the Dong family was the most pitiful. Their efforts were in vain and they had gained nothing. Initially, Dong Qianling had received the news that the Yin family had found a hidden high-level mystical beast that was about to give birth and would soon be able to harvest high-level mystical beast cubs. A newborn cub was obviously more malleable than a baby beast. By the time Dong Qianling and the other three fellows had boasted to the skies in anticipation, they were told that their family members had been besieged by a large group of mystical beasts when they were besieging the mystical beast that had given birth. It was unknown whether the Dong family was too lucky or too unlucky. Their target was indeed a high-level mystical beast that was about to give birth, but it was the queen of a beast king. Her ability was already astonishing and she had attracted many mystical beasts of the same level from her own clan. More than a dozen 8th heaven experts from the Dong family who had participated in the hunt had all died in this battle. It was truly a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. Now, Dong Qianling's eyes were red as he looked at the other three. He was the one who had gotten the opportunity first, but in the end, these three bastards had gotten the best of it and he was the one who had gained nothing. Dong Qianling's insides were on fire right now. Smoke was coming out of his orifices and his eyes were burning with jealousy. "Boss, please delay the three of them first." Dong Qianling begged bitterly. "We must wait for my family's cubs to arrive before we train them together and level them up." It was conceivable that Yun Yang could not care less about young Master Dong's pettiness. "Boss, what do you think? When their little mystical beasts arrive, how about I drug them first? I'll make them half dead and drag the time. I believe my family's little mystical beasts will arrive very soon." When Dong Qianling was saying this, he did not notice that Chun Wanfeng and the others had coincidentally approached the spot where they were talking. Then, of course, Dong Qianling was beaten up by the three of them. Yun Yang had no interest in the quarrel between the four of them at all. All of his attention was placed on something else. Just before this, the Nine Heavens dictum had sent news from Dongxian and the other three empires. A few of the returning generals had relapsed. Now the three empires were negotiating with the empire of Dongxian. Due to the scale of the incident, the empires were unusually chaotic, filled with all sorts of voices. Some said that the oath of blood was vengeful, some said that they should not act rashly, some said that the truth was right before their eyes and it was necessary to send troops to punish them. Some said that the incident was too suspicious and they should be careful of falling into a trap. All in all, there were all sorts of opinions. The opinions were so diverse that it was hard to reconcile. What I want is for all of you to be confused. If you don't panic, how can you take advantage of the chaos? Yun Yang's gaze flickered. This incident will plant a knot in the hearts of the empires. It won't be easy to undo it. After all, so many generals are watching. Even if the poison is cured and the people are saved, the knot won't be undone. Especially Han Sanhe, he's offended He Han Qing. I'm sure he won't have it easy during this period of time. As for the empires of the continent, I don't think there'll be any big waves in the near future. I don't even know if the ruler of Dongxian will use this opportunity to get rid of Han Sanhe. I'm afraid it's inevitable that he'll be sent to the sidelines. Since the external threat can be mitigated, we can focus on solving the other matters during this period of time. The remnants of the Four Seasons Tower must be found and killed. There's also Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Han Qing. If we can get rid of him during this period of time, it'll be greatly beneficial to the future. We must solve the Four Seasons Tower's problem while the empires are uneasy. Time waits for no man, the opportunity must not be missed. It must be done, it must be done. Shui Wuyin had officially taken over Lao Mei's position as the residence of Yun's butler. Wuyin, what do you think about these matters? Do you have any feasible suggestions? Yun Yang laid out these matters for a while. Ever since he had met Shui Wuyin that day, Yun Yang had admired the meticulous way of thinking. This was the perfect opportunity for him to showcase his talent in scheming. Shui Wuyin pondered for a moment before he grabbed a brush and wrote down the matters. He divided them into 4 pieces of paper and placed them on the table. Then he frowned and stared at the 4 pieces of paper, not moving for a long time. This was his first task as Yun Yang's butler. The first fire of a newly appointed official had to be lit perfectly. However, it was destined to take a lot of effort to carry out these matters and how they could be done perfectly. After all, none of these matters were simple. "Young master, the matters that you've mentioned, I've sorted them out just now." Shui Wuyin's voice was still strangely hoarse, but Yun Yang was already used to it. "Let's put Mi Kongquan's matter first. Among all the matters to be done, this is the only one that's relatively easier. Forget about the fact that we can deal with Mi Kongquan as soon as he comes out. Even if he were to hide in the palace, it's not a difficult task for young master." Yun Yang nodded. It was indeed not a difficult task for him. Shui Wuyin said, "The only thing we have to worry about is Mi Kongquan's ability. If we can't kill him in one go, I'm afraid there'll be endless troubles in the future. Once young master makes a move, your true identity will be exposed. If you fail, the news of Supreme Cloud still alive will spread throughout the world." Chapter 217. Shui Wuyin analyzed calmly. According to young master's description, Mi Kongquan's ability should be above the 8th peak, but not the 9th peak. If he was at the 9th peak, he would have recovered completely and wouldn't have been injured by the 4 young masters' attacks. If he was below the 8th peak, he would have been killed in the previous battle. This subordinate guesses that this person's true ability should be hovering between the 8th peak intermediate and ace peak. There shouldn't be too much of a difference. Yin Yang nodded. He was listening to Shui Wuyin's analysis attentively, trying to find out the difference between his and Shui Wuyin's way of thinking. As the saying went, a wise man would always make a mistake, a fool would always be right. Only by listening patiently to constructive suggestions and learning from each other's strengths to make up for their shortcomings could the plan be truly comprehensive. Moreover, Shui Wuyin was no fool. Although he was meticulous and could not compare to Yun Yang when it came to dealing with the ever-changing situation on the battlefield, his thoughts were much more thorough than Yun Yang's. There's one more thing. Mi Kongquan was severely injured by Ling Xiaozui. It's said that he's still recuperating. According to experience, with the recovery speed of an 8th peak ace expert, with the aid of heaven and earth treasures and medicine, even a severe internal injury can be healed within a month. However, Mi Kongquan's injury originated from Ling Xiaozui and was done intentionally. This subordinate thinks that even if Mi Kongquan has recovered a little, it must be very limited. I even suspect that Mi Kongquan might not even be able to completely eliminate Ling Xiaozui's sword energy. Therefore, Mi Kongquan's best state now is only at the 7th peak ace level. It's impossible for him to be higher. If Ling Xiaozui's sword energy still has lingering effects, it can further restrict him. A deliberate attack can cause his injuries to erupt and his combat power to plummet. Based on this, as long as young master strikes at the right time, there's a 90% chance of killing Mi Kongquan while he's unprepared. Shui Wuyin said, with a 90% chance of success, there's no need to worry about this target anymore. It can be done with just the right time and a little patience. Yun Yang nodded lightly. Regarding Mi Kongquan, Shui Wuyin's judgment was almost exactly the same as what he had expected. However, Shui Wuyin's analysis was corroborated from various aspects. The conclusion he came to after synthesizing them was much more meticulous. The second target is the advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. Han Wufei, that's confirmed. However, this subordinate still feels that it's overkill to specifically target this person. Han Wufei is only a small fish. Killing him won't help the bigger picture and might alert the enemy instead. After all, our most important target is He Hanqing, and He Hanqing is untouchable at this stage. It's better to leave it for the last target. As for the third target that young master mentioned, a high-ranking military general. The scope of this point seemed to be a little general. If I want to make a complete confirmation, I'll need young master to give me the authority to come into contact with all the generals in the military who fit this type of physique and temper. Then I'll be able to find the doubts in them before I can confirm it. Right now, we don't have any specific information to analyze, so it's difficult to identify, so we can only postpone it. The two military targets. According to young master's current direction of suspicion, you've eliminated the eastern troop, which is Tai Zheng's men. However, this subordinate thinks that this side can't be eliminated yet. Shui Wuyin's voice was raspy, but each sentence and word was filled with composure and confidence. Yun Yang's gaze flickered. It's not necessarily that there's no traitor within the eastern troop. Tai Zheng was attacked from all sides in the battle that day and was in dire straits. If it wasn't for young master's timely assistance and display your prowess to turn the tide, there might not even be an eastern troop today. The key to victory that day was outside the battlefield. Han Sanhe had led the cavalry to Marshal Iron's back, forming a two-pronged attack. This incident was too bizarre and illogical. Even if the residents of East Defense was the scapegoat, it's still a little far-fetched to say that only the residents of East Defense was involved in this matter. Shui Wuyin looked at Yun Yang and said slowly, however, if there's an additional general who's familiar with the military's arrangements, who leaked the movement of our troops and the defensive loophole, then it's only appropriate and logical. Yun Yang shuddered as he slowly raised his head to look at Shui Wuyin, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Also, even if there's a traitor within the eastern troop and we've confirmed who the traitor belongs to and even uprooted him, we can't be sure that there's no more infiltration of the Four Seasons Tower's men in the other three troops, including the Board of War. Shui Wuyin said, therefore all of these need to be investigated in detail, or even re-examined completely. Yun Yang nodded silently. Besides that, there's another point. Shui Wuyin continued, young master, it's not certain that there aren't any Four Seasons Tower's men lying in ambush in Tiantang City's marketplace or among the civil officials in the imperial court? This needs to be investigated in detail as well. Shui Wuyin said, allow me to remind young master of something. As the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Hanqing's position is highly revered, second only to one and above tens of thousands. Yet, he's rooted in Tiantang City for so many years and has served 3 generations of the monarch. What? This can completely explain that Tiantang City is the base camp of the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Springfrost. It's also where the Hall of Springs headquarters is located. Since Tiantang City is where the Hall of Springs headquarters is located, it's highly possible that at least more than half of the Hall of Springs forces are located within the Empire of Yutong's borders. Tiantang City is of utmost importance. If there are 80 people in the Empire of Yutong's Hall of Spring, then there should be no less than 50 people in Tiantang City. This is the only way to explain why He Hanqing has been operating here for so many years. This also indirectly explains why He Hanqing has no intention of moving even though he's been caught by Ling Xiaozue and could be in danger at any time. That's because he firmly believes that no one can do anything to him here. If this is the case, the source of He Hanqing's confidence must be in Tiantang City. He must be strong enough to be like this. And tyrannical strength is a large number of experts, or a deeply rooted and unbreakable network of relationships. Since He Hanqing is Supreme Lord Springfrost, there must be many experts in the Hall of Spring of the Four Seasons Tower in Tiantang City. At the very least, there must be at least 30 to 40 people. Young Master's target is only a few people. The numbers don't match up at all. Furthermore, if our focus is too narrow, accidents will happen at any time. Our capabilities obviously can't withstand any accidents. Once they happen, we'll be in an unprecedented passive state. Therefore, my final conclusion is that the Hall of Spring of the Four Seasons Tower has at least 30 people. Young Master has said that the eunuch you killed was from the Hall of Autumn. This means that there are a large portion of the Hall of Spring here and also some of the Hall of Autumn's tentacles. Adding both together, the Four Seasons Tower's forces will increase once again. In summary, the battle in Tiantang City will be of utmost importance and will be extremely difficult. Shui Wuyin analyzed the details bit by bit and finally came to this conclusion. Yun Yang nodded slowly with a solemn expression. There are still two areas in Young Master's previous judgment that are wrong. Shui Wuyin sucked in a breath, looking a little hesitant, but he spoke bravely in the end. Yun Yang mused and said, "Speak." There are two areas that Young Master seems to have never paid attention to. Since Shui Wuyin had spoken, he did not hesitate anymore and said, "One is women." Up until now, all the Four Seasons Tower people that Young Master has encountered have been men, but it doesn't mean that there aren't any women in the Four Seasons Tower. In Young Master's choice of targets, you have subconsciously eliminated all women. Young Master has been in the military all year round, all you see are men and your enemies are men too. Therefore you have subconsciously eliminated women. Although this is understandable, it's still a major flaw. The Four Seasons Tower's influence is so vast. It's easy to imagine that the spies they've planted would never overlook the power of women. Many a time, many places, many environments, and many things can only be entered and done by women. After all, women have some innate advantages that men don't have, Shui Wuyin said, therefore we have to reorganize and check the information in this area. In our current understanding, men and women must be treated equally. Yun Yang sighed and said, "Yes, I have indeed neglected this point. If it weren't for your reminder, I'm afraid I would still be like this until I suffer a huge loss. This is my fault, a huge mistake." Yun Yang acknowledged it with a pained expression. A hint of admiration flashed in Shui Wuyin's eyes. Recognizing one's mistake immediately and correcting it, this was a quality that surpassed others. "What about the second point that I've missed?" Yun Yang asked humbly, his tone tinged with a hint of seeking guidance. "The second point that Young Master has missed is..." Shui Wuyin thought about his words and said, "Young Master's vision is too high. You've always been fixated on the top. You've never looked down." Yun Yang frowned and said, "Look down? What do you mean by that?" "Including the people in the palace, the Crown Prince's residence, the generals, Supreme Lord Springfrost, and the Four Seasons Tower's highest authority, Mr. Nian, including the blacksmith, Chu Tianlang, and the censor whom Young Master has already killed," Shui Wuyin said. "In the eyes of ordinary people, all of them are existences that have transcended. In other words, these people themselves possess the power to overturn the clouds and rain. It is also because of this that they have caught Young Master's attention. But on the other hand, Young Master's attention has never been placed on the commoners." Chapter 218. Shui Wuyin spoke slowly, "Some of the people at the bottom can do it as well. Since the Four Seasons Tower is an all-encompassing large-scale organization, it will never let go of the dark side, or rather, places that are not noticed by others." Yun Yang's expression tightened as he asked, Such as? Such as the brothel, the casino, the gangsters, the beggars, the escort agencies, the gold banks, even the lawless areas of Tiantang City?" Shui Wuyin sorted out his thoughts slowly, arranging his thoughts bit by bit before describing them. If I were the Four Seasons Tower's ruler, I would never let go of those who were in charge of the red light lawless areas. I must grasp them in my hands. That's because those places can have unexpected effects under certain circumstances. Yun Yang pondered and nodded again. Listening to Shui Wuin's words, he felt that his train of thought had been broadened. Shui Wuin was right. He had always been looking at the big picture and had not paid special attention to the people in matters of the lower levels. If he had paid attention to the voices of the people during the case of the family of generals, he could have killed it at a much earlier stage instead of waiting for the matter to brew and ferment. This was indeed a blind spot in his train of thought. Young Master is the Nine Supremes think tank and possesses extraordinary wisdom, but in reality, all of your attention has always been on the war between the two armies, Shui Wuin said. So, when you consider things, you usually start from a broad perspective. It's not that young Master hasn't thought of the two mistakes I mentioned just now, it's that young Master hasn't come into contact with these aspects before this. But in the future we will have to face these things. Wuin only hopes that I can help young Master fill in the gaps at any time. As I said before, we can't afford any surprises at our current stage. Everything must be under control. Yun Yang sighed and said, Wuin, you don't have to comfort me. If I didn't think of it, I didn't think of it. A mistake is a mistake. I can't deny this and I don't have to. If I gloss over the past, I'll make the same mistake in the future. Just like you said, we can't afford any accidents. In this world, any mistake can lead to eternal damnation. We can't afford to be wrong. So, it's my negligence. Yun Yang said slowly, emphasizing each word, I admit it, and I will remember that I will never do it again. He looked at Shui Wuin and said in a deep voice, Wuin, it's all thanks to you. Shui Wuin's eyes flashed with admiration and relief. I'm relieved that young Master can think this way. Our first target now is Mikongchuan. Take out the exposed targets first. Then we'll look for those that aren't exposed. Shui Wuin said, although the information we have now is limited, Supreme Lord Springfrost, He Han-Qing, must have the name list of all the members of the Four Seasons Tower's Hall of Spring. Our actions this time are like taking chestnuts out of the fire. We have to proceed step by step. We can't be hasty and we can't make any mistakes. Shui Wuin took a deep breath. Finally done with the analysis, Shui Wuin could not help but rub his temples. It was too taxing on his brain. All right. Yun Yang exhaled, a sharp glint flashing in his eyes. Since we've set our goal, let's not waste any more time. Let's do it. Deal with Mikongchuan first. At night. Cirrus house. Yun Yang had recently developed a very peculiar habit. Each time he wanted to do something he would come here to rest. Even though he would not say anything, it was as if he was subconsciously reporting to his brothers, I'm going to kill them. I'm going to avenge us. He could even convince himself that as long as he did so, his brothers would know and they would protect him together. As long as he succeeded, they would be very happy. As long as he found the spy and killed the enemy, perhaps, his brothers would be very happy. Even if he knew that his thoughts were deceiving himself and others, Yun Yang was willing to believe and be deceived. Even though he knew that his thoughts were deceiving himself, Yun Yang was willing to believe and be deceived. A person who was willing to deceive himself would naturally believe that everything was true, even if it was false. On this day when Yun Yang saw Yun Zuyu, he had a sudden intuition that something was not right, but he could not put his finger on it. Yun Zuyu's gaze when she looked at him seemed to be more affectionate and compassionate than before. Yun Zuyu had always been very nice to him, but now it was obvious that she had gone one step further. Cirrus House had also lost a lot of people. Yun Yang was very familiar with the people in Cirrus House. With just a glance, he could confirm that other than a few familiar faces like Qing Shanxue and a few other sworn sisters who were closest to Yun Zuyu, the rest of the people in Cirrus House were no longer around. They had disappeared. Where are they? Why are there so many of them missing? Has something happened to the Cirrus House? Yun Yang was naturally puzzled by this. He could show some of his true nature in front of Yun Zuyu. Surprised, he asked directly. Yun Zuyu sat down and explained with a smile, there are too many eyes and mouths, so I've dismissed some of the people. It's much quieter now. Yun Yang was taken aback when he heard the question and fell into silence. Yun Yang could guess Yun Zuyu's thoughts at once. It was probably because of Ju Qin that she had sent away everything that she could not be sure of, or rather, those that she had little confidence in. All the potential threats had to be eliminated before they could sprout. Sister, you must have spent a lot of money recently. especially those who might not be a threat but still had to be dismissed. I'm afraid Sister Yu doesn't feel good about it, Yunyang said. He had called her sister-in-law before. However, after Shui Wuin's reminder, Yunyang felt that he needed to be more careful with his words and actions. For example, the word sister-in-law. If he were to accidentally call her sister-in-law, it might become a source of danger and eventually lead to disaster. If Yun Zuyu were to die because of this, Yunyang would have to kill himself without needing anyone else. Because of this, he had changed the way he addressed her back to Sister Yu. It's not that serious. Yun Zuyu smiled. We sisters have no other choice in this line of work. As women, who doesn't wish to have a good man, a stable home, or a life that they yearn for? This time, all the sisters who left, whether they've been removed or not, have each been given 1,000,000 silver taels. I believe that the days ahead will be peaceful and promising. Yun Zuyu heaved a long sigh of relief. I wish them all the best. I wish for each of them to be safe and happy, to leave this place, to live the stable life that they've yearned for, to be completely their own, to be safe and happy. This line of work is always short-lived, how can it last? Yun Zuyu smiled bitterly. The sisters will have to leave sooner or later. I'm just helping them to make up their minds in advance. Yunyang said quietly, Sister Yu is right. I only hope that they'll be able to be happy in the future. Yun Zuyu looked at Yunyang with her bright eyes and said with concern, Young brother hasn't had a good rest these days. Why do you look so pale? Yunyang smiled and said, What's wrong with it? My days are actually more comfortable and carefree than Sister Yu's. Yun Zuyu nodded but could not help looking down. Your brothers are not by your side now. You're alone in the center of this whirlpool. Every moment is a matter of life and death. How can you be more comfortable and carefree than I am? Many of the sisters in Sira's house have left. I wonder if Sister Yu... Yunyang changed the topic. When will you have your own, the life that you yearn for? Once the words left his mouth, Yunyang regretted it immediately. He wished he could slap himself a few times. Wasn't this touching a sore spot? Yun Zuyu smiled softly and said, If I were to leave too, when he comes back, won't he have to spend a lot of effort to look for me? As for the life that I yearn for, it's here now. Yunyang was silent, the sadness in his heart growing. Yun Zuyu smiled faintly and said softly, Actually, a woman's life is very simple. It's all about waiting. It's the same no matter what kind of woman she is. When she's young, she's waiting for her lover, waiting for her home. When she has a home, she's still waiting. Waiting for her man to come home from work, waiting for him to eat, waiting for him to reunite with him, waiting. When she's older, she's waiting for her children and grandchildren. And now, I'm also waiting for my lover. Yun Zuyu said, Sister Yu is always willing to endure this process of waiting. As long as there's one person in a woman's life who's worthy of her waiting like this, isn't it a form of happiness as well? Really? Yunyang's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said dryly, Yes, yes. It's indeed a form of happiness. I believe Sister Yu's words without a doubt. Yun Zuyu smiled like 100 flowers blooming. Why don't you talk about me? Let's talk about you this time. Young brother Yun, if I'm not wrong, I'm afraid your real identity isn't the son of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, is it? Yunyang was taken aback upon hearing her words. He was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting Yun Zuyu to be so straightforward and direct. I guessed it. Yun Zuyu's eyebrows arched. Yunyang sighed softly. Sister Yu is smart indeed. You're right, I'm indeed not Marquis Yun's biological son. Yun Zuyu asked curiously, Then is it convenient for you to reveal young brother Yun's real identity and background? Yunyang's face was steely, expressionless as he said, I don't even know about this myself. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.